On a starlit balcony, a pink-haired girl named Vivian was startled by a man approaching from behind, causing her to freeze for a moment. Soon, Vivian turned around, revealing a bright smile, and warmly addressed the man as Sir Rahel. Sir Rahel, seemingly moved by Vivian's beauty, placed a hand on his forehead, wondering why she was still out on the balcony in front of the giant clock so late. Vivian asked if he had heard about what happened at the Imperial banquet. Rahel admitted he knew about the Crown Prince's proposal to her, which Vivian confirmed, mentioning that it was the very topic she wanted to discuss. Then, she made a strange request, asking in a serious tone if he could find a trustworthy man for her. Rahel was dumbfounded by her request, but she explained that she would prefer the man to be the son of a foreign noble family. She justified her haste by saying she was being forced to marry immediately, or at least announce an engagement. Otherwise, her inevitable fate would be to marry the Crown Prince. She added that she only needed someone willing to enter a one-year contract marriage, which left Rahel shocked and bewildered. Rahel, appearing somewhat annoyed and cynical, sarcastically asked if she had really decided to go through with such a ridiculous contract marriage with another scoundrel. Vivian, surprised by a sudden change in tone, asked why he was being like this, appearing very confused and anxious. Rahel, in a voice filled with pain and sorrow, reminded her that she had once promised to live with him forever. She was stunned by his words, and before she could react, Rahel suddenly grabbed her forcefully, terrifying her. He moved closer, cornering her, and insisted that she was the one who had told him before that she wanted to marry him, leaving her in a state of complete shock. Vivian panicked internally, desperately trying to recall when she could have ever said such a thing. Seeing the pained look in his eyes, she felt terrible and pleaded with him not to look at her like that, as it made her feel like a bad person. She tried to vehemently deny his claim, insisting that she had never said such a thing to him, while he held her firmly. However, she remained confused, wondering deep down about the reason for his sudden and strange behavior at this moment. Vivian began to wonder why the image of Rahel now was overlapping with the image of a little girl from her past, the only person she had ever promised to spend her life with. She remembered that as a child, she had promised to come back and see her when the time was right, calling her a long-missed, precious friend. A thought flashed through Vivian's mind that Sir Rahel might be her childhood friend, Rahel, but she immediately dismissed the idea, thinking it was impossible. As he demanded a clear answer from her, he increased his pressure on her, pinning her hand against the wall and reminding her that marriage requires this kind of physical intimacy. He then moved even closer, as if to kiss her, adding that marriage also includes kissing. In that moment, Vivian remembered a shocking fact. The Rahel she knew was a girl, and in fact, she was the villainess of this story's world. Rahel asked if she could really perform these intimate acts with another man. She answered no in her confusion, realizing deep down that she couldn't do them with him either. Her life had been turned upside down. Her best friend of a lifetime turned out to be a man, making her feel like the victim of a huge deception. The narrative shifts back 10 years to when Vivian was a young child, bedridden with a high fever. After waking up from that high fever, she realized she had been reincarnated into the world of a novel she had read in her past life, titled The Crown Prince's Beloved Bird. The little girl woke up in extreme fear, realizing she was in big trouble. She understood that she had now become Vivian, the original heroine of the story she had read, and that the story's male lead was none other than the Crown Prince. Prince Alan. At first glance, being reincarnated into a romance novel where a commoner girl wins the Crown Prince's heart might seem lucky. However, the reality was far from it, as this particular novel ended in tragedy. The heroine died of a terminal illness, leaving Crown Prince Alan to drown in a sea of regret and despair. A young Vivian sat on the floor, shocked by the terrifying realization. She realized she was the heroine who suffered from an incurable disease, mana overload syndrome. This strange illness caused the patient's body to produce a massive amount of magical energy, which would gradually accumulate and concentrate in the heart area until eventually the accumulated energy would reach an unbearable level, triggering a terrible explosion and killing the host. Despite this cruel fate, there was still a glimmer of hope. Vivian remembered that in the entire novel, there was only one person who could alleviate the symptoms of this terminal illness. She wrote that name on the paper in front of her, Rahel. Rahel Delphin was not just an ordinary character. She was the #1 villainess in the novel Vivian had been reincarnated into. However, her role was not limited to competing for the prince's love. She was more of a final boss with grand ambitions to seize the throne. Unlike Vivian, who suffered from an excess of mana, Rahel possessed the unique ability to absorb magical energy from her surroundings and make it her own. In the original story, Vivian refused Rahel's treatment out of concern for Prince Alan's safety, which ultimately led to her death. But the new Vivian decided to abandon the original plot, declaring that a hero who only realizes his lover's value after her death was not worth her time, and crossed his name off her list. She decided she no longer cared about the prince's regret or anything else, resolving that her new survival plan was to stay by Rahel's side and live a long, healthy life. She didn't stop there, adding an extra goal to her plan, to help Rahel avoid going down the wrong path. Vivian deemed it a perfect plan and, full of enthusiasm, set out from her small bakery to execute it, heading straight for the place where Rahel lived. She finally reached her destination, standing before the magnificent villa of Duke Delphin, where Rahel resided. She was well aware that Rahel was the only daughter of the illustrious Ducal family. To get close to her, she first had to make her presence known to those around her. As a commoner girl, she couldn't easily meet the young Duchess, so she prepared a clever plan to approach her. Her plan was aimed at changing the tragic ending in order to survive. The first step of the plan was to befriend the servants of the ducal household and gather necessary information about Rahel and her family. She hoped that by gathering enough information, she would get a chance to contact Rahel directly. After mustering her courage, she decided it was time to act, stepping out from where she was and greeting a group of servants. As expected, she was met with surprised and confused looks, so she decided to break the ice by introducing herself first. With a bright smile, she introduced herself as Vivian, the daughter of Dias Hessen, the owner of Vivi's bakery in the village, and said she was 9 years old. She told them she had heard they recently moved into the neighborhood and had come to visit and welcome them, expressing her admiration for the magnificent mansion she saw every day on her way past. She offered to be their village guide, claiming she had lived here for half her life and that they could ask her about anything they were curious about. She began to win them over by offering advice, telling a maid about a very effective lotion sold at a village shop that makes skin incredibly soft. The maid immediately showed interest and asked about the price, and Vivian realized her plan was starting to work. Seeing that she had successfully captured their attention, Vivian felt she had it in the bag. She continued to chat enthusiastically, explaining that the lotion cost 1 silver coin and that there was a special buy-one-get-one free offer, before recommending a delicious drink served by Uncle Pierre at the tavern. One of the guards interrupted her with a teasing smile, wondering how a child her age would know if a drink was good or not, and if she had tried it herself. Vivian immediately denied it, explaining that her recommendation was based on the testimony of an old man in the village, who drank it every day. She then added with childish exaggeration that the man would swear every night to quit drinking the next day, only to run off to drink it again in the morning, proving that the drink was simply irresistible. Her amusing story made the servants laugh, and the guard commented that he would have to go check it out for himself. Vivian smiled to herself, satisfied that she had successfully broken the ice with them. Shortly after, another servant asked if she knew where to buy high-quality cheese, as he needed to buy some for the next day. Vivian answered confidently, puffing out her small chest and proudly declaring that she was familiar with every inch of the neighborhood, and that he could completely count on her, which the man gratefully accepted. After saying their goodbyes and hoping to see each other the next day, the little girl left, with the servants warmly seeing her off and wishing her a safe trip home. Vivian walked along the road with a sly smile, thinking that today's achievement was more than enough for a start. Despite her success in getting close to the servants, she felt a little regretful that she hadn't been able to see Rahel herself. But she quickly comforted herself, thinking there was still plenty of time and that there would be many opportunities in the future. Just as she was about to leave, she looked up at the mansion and suddenly caught a glimpse of a girl standing in an upstairs window. Her eyes widened in surprise when she realized that the girl she was seeing from a distance was none other than Rahel. Vivian was captivated by her stunning beauty, wondering how someone could possess such otherworldly beauty. She had an ethereal kind of beauty, and the cold expression on her face made her seem even more mysterious, giving off a mystical and enchanting aura. She suddenly snapped out of her daze, realizing this was no time to be standing and staring from a distance. She decided to hurry over and say hello, but before she could take a step, Rahel disappeared from the window. Vivian felt disappointed, realizing Rahel had gone back into her room. She wondered anxiously if she had seemed too forward or suspicious during their first indirect encounter. But she quickly shook off that feeling, convincing herself that she had at least made some kind of impression and that getting closer would come later. She felt self-satisfied and proud of her achievements for the day, considering her daily goal successfully met. The next day, Vivian kept her promise and went with one of the Ducal household's servants to buy cheese, as they had arranged. The cheese seller was a stubborn old man who seemed both surprised and skeptical at the idea of a noble wanting to buy his humble cheese. Vivian enthusiastically intervened, pointing out his skepticism about his own delicious goods, and with her powers of persuasion, managed to convince the stubborn Uncle Gerald, securing a supply contract for the Ducal household. On the way back, the servant expressed his deep gratitude to her, calling her by her name, Vivian, and thanking her. He told her that thanks to her, they would be able to serve cheese at the dinner table. She replied humbly that it was just neighbors helping each other, but inwardly, she wore a sly smile, thinking that it was now his turn to repay her. She then decided to set her plan in motion, suddenly pretending to feel unwell. She clutched her stomach, claiming to be very hungry from all the walking, and suggested they hurry home, leaving the servant confused by her sudden change. The servant felt a bit awkward, realizing he couldn't just ignore a hungry child, especially after she had been such a huge help. Just as Vivian was about to walk away, he suddenly called out to her. Vivian broke into a triumphant smile, realizing her plan had worked perfectly. Vivian feigned shyness, hesitantly asking what he wanted, and he invited her inside to have some snacks with him as a thank you. Unable to hide her joy, Vivian jumped up and shouted hooray, before restraining herself and shyly asking if it was really okay. Vivian sat around a large table with the servants, happily eating delicious cake and thanking them for their generosity. As she enjoyed her treat, a maid suggested showing her the garden later, mentioning its exquisite design, which Vivian enthusiastically accepted. Vivian naively commented that the place looked like a palace where a princess would live. Another maid replied that a princess did indeed live there, one known as the Ice Princess. These words piqued Vivian's curiosity, and she thought of the girl she had seen on the third floor the day before, wondering if she was the Duke's daughter and what her personality was like despite her captivating beauty. Just then, their conversation was interrupted by a little girl who burst into the room, demanding a piece of cake. The girl was surprised by Vivian's presence and asked who she was. The servant who had been talking to Vivian intervened, explaining to the angry girl that Vivian was a neighborhood child who had helped him, so he brought her in for a snack. The maid smiled and suggested that the girl, apparently named Sally, try to get along with Vivian. But Sally replied with disdain and mockery, asking if they expected her to play with a village bumpkin. Vivian wondered who this arrogant girl was, and since Rahel's only family was her grandfather, Duke Idelfin, she realized the girl must be the nanny's daughter. The maid went on to explain that Sally, despite being a commoner, acted like a noble lady because her mother was treated with favor in the mansion, leading her to believe she was a noble herself. Sally flew into a rage, screaming at the servant, asking how he dared bring a street beggar into the Duke's villa and describing Vivian as filthy and disgusting. The maid tried to calm her down, pointing out that her words were too harsh for a child, but Sally completely ignored her, refusing to befriend the dirty child. She ordered the servants to throw Vivian out at once, but she was interrupted by a commanding male voice loudly asking about the commotion. As everyone turned, they saw a man with a commanding presence standing at the entrance. The servants immediately rose and bowed respectfully, addressing him as Your Grace. Vivian instantly realized that this man was none other than Duke Kaltz Idelfin, Rahel's grandfather. Sally wasted no time rushing to the Duke to complain, saying that this child had trespassed into the mansion without permission and had dared to enter the place where he resided. Vivian panicked for a moment, but quickly realized this could be her golden opportunity. If she could make a good impression on the Duke, she might get a chance to meet Rahel directly. The Duke asked in a stern tone who had brought the child into the mansion. The servant who had accompanied Vivian hesitantly confessed that it was him. The servant defended himself, saying she had helped him get the cheese, and he felt bad letting her go without a reward, so he just wanted to give her a snack before sending her on her way. The matter piqued the Duke's curiosity. He wondered how such a small child could have succeeded in negotiating a price, even though she looked like an ordinary girl. Just then, Vivian seized the opportunity to step forward, curtsying politely and respectfully as she introduced herself. "I am Vivian, daughter of Deus Hessen, and I greet his grace, the esteemed Duke." She then politely asked for permission to speak, which the Duke granted. She confidently told him that the servant, James, had told her that his grace was a man of honor who would never neglect someone who offered help, and that turning away someone who would help might make him angry. She cleverly continued, explaining that James said he would follow his master's will and reward her, which made the Duke immediately understand that she was subtly trying to prevent him from punishing the servant. The Duke realized that if he kicked her out and punished James, he would appear as someone who doesn't know how to repay a favor. The Duke turned to the butler, Owen, and ordered him to make sure the child received her due reward of food and money. Sally was shocked by the Duke's decision and angrily asked how he could reward this beggar instead of punishing her. The Duke explained to Sally in a firm tone that Vivian was right and that it was dishonorable to mistreat someone who had helped the Delphin family. He then sternly asked if she thought his decision was wrong. Sally became flustered and lowered her head in fear, murmuring that she thought it was a merciful and just judgment. Vivian bowed to the Duke in gratitude, thanking him for his generosity and promising to repay the kindness in any way she could in the future. The Duke smiled slightly, thinking that her promise meant she intended to frequent the mansion, and he mentally noted that she was both clever and a bit of a little swindler. But he saw the usefulness of her intelligence, thinking that a clever child could be easily used. As it happened, he needed a girl her age, so her appearance was perfectly timed. The next day, Vivian was helping her father clean the bakery, as usual. Her father, Deus Hessen, noticed she had been waking up early recently and affectionately asked her about the secret to her sudden diligence. Vivian thought to herself that she was waking up early to go to the villa later, but she was worried her father would find out about her secret visits. She remembered how he had strictly forbidden her from going near the villa last time, threatening to scold her until her ears swelled, which made her wonder about the reason for such a stern warning. To evade his questions, she told him innocently that she had decided to be a good and diligent girl from now on. Her father seemed pleased with the news, but suddenly stumbled while moving the bakery sign. Vivian rushed to him anxiously, asking if he was okay and reminding him that she had warned him to be careful when putting up the sign. He tried to check his face for injuries, but he assured her he was fine. He took off his glasses to check them. Vivian was relieved they weren't broken, but wondered why he insisted on wearing them when his eyesight was good, as they only hindered his work. Vivian helplessly admitted to herself that her father's baking skills were terrible, even making her wonder what strange ingredients he used to make bread of such a bizarre color. Despite this, people kept visiting the bakery. Just then, 2 ladies from the village came in, praising Vivian for helping her father. Her father greeted them with a brilliant smile and his handsome face, making the ladies admire his charming appearance. He feigned shyness in response, which made Vivian internally remark that it was all thanks to her father's good looks. Vivian sighed regretfully, thinking that the bakery's sales would surely go up if her father didn't wear those glasses. The 2 ladies invited Vivian to play later before they left, and she bid them a warm farewell. She then turned to her father, who asked if they were ready to start receiving customers. She replied enthusiastically that they were. Suddenly, a luxurious carriage stopped in front of the bakery, which confused her father, who wondered why it had stopped at their small shop. Vivian was shocked to see the crest of the Ducal house of Edelphin engraved on the carriage door. Her shock intensified when the butler who had been with the Duke yesterday stepped out of the carriage. The man approached and greeted them. She responded in a fluster, wondering about the reason for his sudden visit. But her father, who was clueless about the whole affair, gave her a stern and questioning look, as if asking how the Edelphin's butler knew her. Vivian was scared of her father's reaction, but she quickly gathered her courage, put on a bright smile, and asked the butler why he was here, wondering if he had come to buy bread. The butler replied that he was here for something else, which piqued her curiosity. He then formally introduced himself to her father, explaining that he was the butler of the Ducal house of Edelphin, and his name was Owen. The butler, Owen, spoke directly to Vivian's father, asking if he was Mr. Dias Hessen, Vivian's father. Dias confirmed his identity in surprise, after which the butler got straight to the point. Owen told him that the Duke wished for Vivian to become the young lady's playmate, which surprised both Vivian and her father. Vivian was filled with happiness, feeling that luck was finally on her side and that her plan was working out perfectly. Owen explained that after meeting Vivian yesterday, the Duke was deeply impressed by her character and potential. Upon hearing this, Vivian's father's expression completely changed into one of terrifying rage, and he muttered the Duke met Vivian yesterday, which made his daughter feel as if his gaze could kill her. The butler continued to explain the offer, stating that Vivian would attend classes with the young lady and that the Edelphin family would fully support her with everything she needed, which prompted Vivian to happily hug her father. Vivian thought the conditions offered were excellent, but she was stunned to hear her father say that he was grateful for the generous offer, but that he was forced to refuse. Dias argued that his daughter was still lacking and that he had much to teach her, so she was not qualified to be the young lady's playmate. Vivian immediately objected, trying to convince her father to accept this irreplaceable opportunity. She grabbed her father's sleeve, shouting that they needed to talk, and pulled him away from the butler. As soon as they were inside the bakery, her father asked in a stern tone why she had gone there. Vivian realized that her original plan of using cute antics and tears wouldn't work on him this time, so she feigned innocence and replied that she was just curious to see the Duke's villa and had intended to only look from the outside, but happened to meet the Duke. Her father sighed and said he would go talk to the butler, then try to make her promise not to go to the ducal estate again. Vivian firmly refused, insisting that she had to go there. Her father asked for the reason behind her insistence. Vivian couldn't tell him the whole truth about her condition or the story of the original novel, so she decided to use a partial truth, telling him that she wanted to cure her illness. Her father was shocked by her words, and his expression changed instantly. He grabbed her with deep concern, asking why she was suddenly talking about being sick and if she had been feeling unwell recently or hiding something from him. Vivian assured him she was fine and asked him to calm down. She explained with tears in her eyes that she just wanted to get better quickly so she could live with him for a long time and not make him worry about her anymore. She added that the Duke surely knew famous doctors and wizards in the capital, and if they asked for help, he wouldn't refuse. After a moment of silence and thought, her father hugged her and agreed to her request. During the hug, her father decided they would try to ask the Duke for help. Vivian was ecstatic and hugged her father tightly, thanking him for his consent. The next day, Vivian went to the ducal estate as planned. The butler, Owen, received her in a magnificent glass greenhouse. Owen welcomed her and told her he would go get the young lady, asking her to wait for a moment. Vivian sat and waited anxiously, thinking that she was finally going to have her official meeting with Rahel. Vivian began to straighten her clothes, trying to look her best as she wanted to make a good impression. When she heard approaching footsteps, she turned eagerly, thinking it was Rahel. But to her surprise, it was the nanny's daughter, Sally, who appeared, looking furious as she questioned her like a wild beast about how she dared to enter here again. Vivian smiled confidently and told her that she was here to be the young lady's playmate and looked forward to working with her. Sally became even more enraged and mockingly asked who she thought she was. She screamed at her, asking who gave her permission to enter without her mother's approval. Vivian feigned innocence in her reply, wondering if the Duke also needed her mother's permission. Then she suggested with a sly smile that she go and tell her mother that the Duke had brought a beggar from the market to be the young lady's friend. Vivian's words infuriated Sally, who swore she would see what would become of her. Sally left in a rage, while Vivian laughed to herself, thinking that Sally got what she deserved. After the air cleared, Vivian noticed that a long time had passed and Rahel had not yet come. She started to feel anxious, hoping Rahel would arrive soon. Suddenly, she began to feel the symptoms of her magic overload again. She collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath, feeling as if her heart was about to explode. She realized she couldn't let anyone see her like this, as it could jeopardize her chances. She thought to herself that they wouldn't want a sick child as a playmate for the young lady, so she decided to leave quickly. She struggled to her feet, deciding to find a place to hide until she felt better. But as she headed for the exit, she bumped into someone. When she looked up, she found herself in Rahel's arms. She snapped out of her shock and greeted the young lady. Vivian told her she would be her playmate from today on, but Rahel silently walked to the table and sat down. Vivian noticed that Rahel seemed very cold and wondered if the villainess's hatred for the heroine was an unavoidable fate. But then she suddenly noticed something strange. She realized that the sharp pain that had been squeezing her heart just moments ago had completely disappeared. She was amazed. Usually, even after the pain subsided, a dull ache would linger, but this time, the pain had vanished completely and quickly just from Rahel's simple touch. Vivian realized she had found a precious treasure and that Rahel was her true cure. So she firmly resolved to become Rahel's best friend, no matter what it took. Driven by enthusiasm and gratitude, Vivian declared her admiration for Rahel and promised to make her happy from now on. But Rahel's reaction was shocking and cold. She looked at Vivian coldly and ordered her to never come here again. Vivian's hopes were shattered in an instant. Unable to comprehend what she had heard, she asked in shock what that meant. Vivian began to cry and wail, watching her dream of a long and healthy life crumble because of this cruel rejection. However, despite her despair, a look of defiance and determination lit up her eyes. Vivian told herself that it couldn't end like this and remembered her principle of persistence. If you chop a tree 10 times and it doesn't fall, you must chop it an 11th time. She encouraged herself to be patient and persistent to achieve her goal. A few days later, when it was time for tea with Rahel, Vivian excitedly prepared to apply once again. The tree chopping principle. Vivian sat and waited, but 30 minutes passed, and Rahel still hadn't appeared. Vivian remembered the harsh words Rahel had said last time, telling her not to come back. She began to feel frustrated and worried, fearing that Rahel was intentionally ignoring her. But suddenly, she heard a sound. When she turned her head, she saw someone approaching and, thinking it was Rahel, was overjoyed. But to her disappointment, the person approaching was the nanny's daughter, Sally, who seemed to be enjoying the situation. Sally approached her with a mocking smile. Sally greeted her in a mockingly childish way, then said in a condescending tone that Vivian lacked taste as expected of an uneducated girl. She rudely asked if Vivian knew why her young lady hadn't arrived yet. Then she answered her own question, claiming that her young lady thought someone as uneducated as Vivian was too low status to play with. She arrogantly suggested that Vivian should know her place and go home, adding that a naive child like her was annoying. Vivian pretended to be sad and asked if she really thought so, then perked up and said with a bright smile that she wanted to ask the young lady herself. Sally was shocked by her reaction, but Vivian continued to explain that if what Sally said was true, she would certainly have to go home. But if it was a lie, she leaned in and whispered in Sally's ear that in that case, Sally would become a disrespectful child who defied the Duke's orders and sent someone home on her own authority. Sally panicked and screamed that she wasn't lying. Vivian calmly responded, questioning if that was true. Then she said she had to confirm it herself and rushed into the house, while Sally tried unsuccessfully to stop her. Vivian ran through the corridors of the Ducal mansion, shouting that she would never back down. She was determined to see Rahel today, no matter the cost. Finally, she reached a room and saw Rahel standing at the top of the stairs, and at that moment, Sally caught up to her. Sally ran to Rahel, claiming she had tried to stop Vivian from coming in, but Vivian had insisted on seeing her. Rahel looked at them coldly and asked why Vivian had come. Vivian felt frustrated by Rahel's cold reaction, but she had a backup plan ready. She pretended to be naive and told Rahel that she knew tea time was boring for her. So she suggested spending their time together in another way, by taking a tour of the town. Before Rahel could answer, Sally quickly intervened, claiming that her young lady hated leaving the Ducal mansion and asked Rahel to confirm her words. Vivian looked at the hesitant Rahel, but thanks to having read the original novel, Vivian knew the truth. Rahel actually longed to go out. Rahel was the daughter of the late crown prince, who had died for treason. Her mother was the duke's daughter, Lady Isella. On the surface, the emperor couldn't do anything to Rahel, the illegitimate daughter of the duke's daughter. But in reality, everyone in the empire knew that this didn't mean forgiveness. For this reason, Rahel's way of survival until now had been to avoid drawing attention to herself as much as possible. She lived shut away in the ducal mansion, hiding her existence as if she were dead until everyone forgot about her. Vivian thought that Rahel's repressed emotions might eventually turn into rebellion, but in this small town, there was no emperor and no one knew her true identity, so there was no need to hide. Vivian reached out her hand to Rahel again and gently asked if she wanted to go to town with her. Rahel seemed to hesitate for a moment, but before she could answer, a woman's voice interrupted them, saying that would be difficult. Sally happily ran to her mother. Vivian deduced that this woman was Sally's mother. She was Rahel's nanny, Margaret Hayes, and she told Vivian that the young lady had other plans for the day. Vivian was angry that this nanny, under the pretext of protection, was making decisions for Rahel without even listening to her opinion. Vivian tried to argue, saying there was still time before tea was over and they could be back before another appointment. The nanny replied sharply, insisting that it would be difficult to go out today and sternly asked if her words were so hard to understand. Vivian didn't give up. She asked with a bright smile, "Would it be okay if I got permission from His Grace the Duke?" The nanny flew into a rage and screamed at her that she was in charge of the young lady's education, and her will was the Duke's will. But just then, the Duke himself appeared, wondering if he had ever forbidden the child from going out. The nanny became flustered and tried to justify her position by saying she was worried about the young lady's safety. The Duke calmly replied that if she was truly worried, she could just hire more guards. He then turned to his granddaughter, told her she could go if she wanted to, and added that she must be back before sunset. The nanny tried to object again, claiming the young lady had an etiquette lesson soon, but the Duke cut her off, suggesting the lesson be postponed until tomorrow, and ordered the butler, Owen, to prepare the carriage. Vivian felt a great sense of victory and happily muttered to herself, "Is this what power tastes like?" She realized the nanny and her daughter, Sally, only wanted to get rid of her, so she decided to push her plan further and take more risks. She ran to the Duke and called out to him. She bowed respectfully and said she had wanted to greet him but didn't dare to disturb him when she saw he was busy. The Duke replied that he thought they had already greeted each other. Vivian answered with a smile that this was the first time she was greeting him as the young lady's playmate. She continued to explain naively that her father always taught her that when visiting a friend's house for the first time, one must introduce oneself and greet people politely. Then she asked, rather boldly, if she could join them for dinner that evening. The situation froze instantly, and a strange silence filled the air. The nanny grabbed Vivian, shouting that she knew they shouldn't have brought in an uneducated commoner child. But the Duke burst out laughing, saying he saw no reason why he couldn't invite his granddaughter's friend for dinner, and then ordered Owen to prepare a feast. Vivian clenched her fists and cheered with immense joy. Her plan had succeeded. She had managed to get a dinner invitation and facilitate Rahel's first successful outing, or so she thought at first. Vivian was surprised when Rahel, sitting in her room, announced that she wasn't going. Vivian stood up in shock and asked the reason for her sudden refusal. Vivian tried to persuade her, asserting that there must be a reason she didn't want to go and promising to solve any problem she was facing. Rahel replied that it was noisy and chaotic there, and she didn't like it. She added that she hated crowded places. Vivian realized that Rahel was afraid of people's gazes. She was worried that people in town would recognize her and whisper behind her back that she was the traitor's daughter. Vivian confidently said that this was a problem she could solve. She asked Rahel to trust her. The next day, Vivian led Rahel and the accompanying guards up a rugged path to a verdant hilltop. Upon arriving, Vivian was surprised by the guards' apparent weakness and naively asked if they had only eaten a little bread today. Then she playfully promised that from now on, she would tell the Duke to give them more bread. The guards were horrified at the thought of a small child running to the Duke to ask for more bread for them. They imagined themselves standing before the Duke as he mockingly asked if they were asking for more bread because they were tired or worse, accused them of neglecting their duties and shaming the knights of the duchy. They immediately regained their energy and asked Vivian if she was joking. Vivian smiled and said she was serious, then suggested they find a shady spot to rest while she and Rahel explored the hilltop. The guards reluctantly agreed, and Vivian led Rahel further up the path. When they reached the summit, Rahel gasped at the breathtaking view of the town spread out below them. From this height, the town looked peaceful and beautiful, with no one to judge or whisper about her identity. Rahel felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. Vivian watched Rahel's face light up with genuine joy and felt satisfied with her plan. She suggested they sit down and enjoy the view together. As they sat in silence, Rahel finally spoke, thanking Vivian for bringing her here. Vivian replied that this was just the beginning of many adventures they would share. Back at the Ducal mansion, the nanny Margaret was furious about their outing. She complained to the Duke that Vivian was a bad influence on his granddaughter. The Duke, however, seemed pleased to hear that Rahel had gone out and enjoyed herself. He dismissed the nanny's complaints, saying that a child needed to experience the world. That evening, at the dinner table, Vivian presented herself with impeccable manners, deliberately showing the nanny and Sally that she was not the uneducated commoner they claimed her to be. The Duke was impressed by her etiquette and intelligence. He engaged her in conversation, asking about her family background and her intentions toward his granddaughter. Vivian answered carefully, explaining that she came from a merchant family and that her greatest wish was to become Rahel's true friend and help her live a happier life. The Duke nodded approvingly, while the nanny's face darkened. She realized that Vivian was far more clever and ambitious than she had initially thought. After dinner, Rahel walked Vivian to the entrance of the mansion. For the first time, she smiled genuinely and said she looked forward to their next meeting. Vivian's heart soared. Her plan was working perfectly. She had not only gained Rahel's affection, but also the Duke's approval, which would protect her from the nanny's interference. As Vivian walked home through the moonlit streets, she reflected on how different this world was from the novel she had read. Things were unfolding in unexpected ways. She realized that while she had knowledge of the original story, real people's emotions and choices were far more complex and unpredictable than any narrative could capture. Nevertheless, Vivian was determined to use her knowledge wisely to change Rahel's fate for the better and to build a genuine bond with her that transcended the boundaries of the original story. From that day forward, Vivian became a regular visitor to the Ducal mansion. She and Rahel spent their days exploring the town, reading books together, and sharing their dreams. The nanny's grip on Rahel loosened as the Duke grew fonder of Vivian and began to trust her influence over his granddaughter. Sally, too, learned to respect Vivian after witnessing her cleverness. Slowly but surely, Rahel began to change. She smiled more often, spoke with more confidence, and showed genuine interest in the world around her. Vivian knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey, but she was confident that with persistence and determination, she could help Rahel escape her tragic destiny. And perhaps, in the process, she would discover her own purpose in this strange new world she found herself in. Vivian started frequenting the Ducal mansion, to the point where she became closer to the villa's gatekeeper than anyone else. Vivian decided not to let dinner fall into silence, and took the initiative to speak to break the tension. She turned to the Duke, thanking him for allowing them to go to the village today. The Duke, intrigued, asked where she had gone, so Vivian enthusiastically told him that since they didn't have much time, they went to the back mountain, from where they could overlook the entire village. The Duke praised her ingenuity in finding the best way to see the village in a short time, especially since she didn't want to keep him waiting long at the dinner table. But Vivian wanted him to notice the fact that his granddaughter hadn't been out in a long time, and she thought, shouldn't the Duke ask his granddaughter if she had fun? Then, she playfully suggested that they all go to the village together next time. The Duke replied coolly that he would accompany them if he had time. Silence fell over them again, and Vivian found the quiet suffocating. She believed it would be better for Rahel's mental health to get closer to her only relative, her grandfather, and it was also a chance to prevent Rahel from falling into melancholy. But to achieve that, we first must discover the reason for the cold distance between them. Just as everyone was eating in silence, the butler, Owen, burst in without knocking, shattering the peace. The Duke was surprised by his sudden intrusion, so Owen apologized in a fluster. He then informed the Duke that an inspector from the Imperial Palace had arrived. This greatly shocked the Duke. Meanwhile, at Vivian's bakery, her father was surprised to see 3 uniformed officials walk into the shop. He told them the shop was closed for the day, but one of them stepped forward and asked directly if he was Dias Hessen, Vivian Hessen's father. Vivian's father felt extremely anxious. He realized from their speech, demeanor, and uniforms that they were Imperial knights and worried they had come because they had discovered Vivian's true identity. The knight repeated his question, emphasizing that he was asking if he was indeed Dias Hessen. Dias hid his nervousness, concealing a knife behind his back as he asked their purpose. The knight introduced himself as Curtis Rohan, a member of the Imperial Knights, and requested to see Vivian. Dias anxiously wondered why the Imperial Palace was looking for his daughter. Curtis told him that he had heard his daughter was Miss Edelfine's playmate and had some questions for her. Dias felt a sense of relief that they weren't here for Vivian herself, but he realized he had to be careful lest they discover her identity. He thought to himself that it was a good thing Vivian wasn't here right now. He began to apologize, trying to tell them Vivian wasn't home, but at that very moment, Vivian pushed open the bakery door and excitedly shouted that she was back. Her father was devastated, rubbing his eyes in disbelief at what was happening. Vivian walked in with a face full of happiness, but she soon froze in place when she saw the scene before her, a group of large, grim-faced men surrounding her father. She thought they were thieves trying to rob him. The knight, Curtis, walked towards her and asked, "Are you Vivian?" Vivian noticed that although the knight had a smile on his lips, his eyes weren't smiling, and she remembered her father's warning to be wary of people who only smile with their mouths. Vivian confidently answered yes, and the knight then introduced himself as one of the Imperial Knights, stating they were here on the orders of His Majesty the Emperor. When she saw the crest on his uniform, she remembered something. Her father had shown her this crest before. He had warned her that if she saw people wearing clothes with this crest, she should stay as far away from them as possible, because ill-intentioned nobles would punish her even if she had done nothing wrong. And the closer they were to the Emperor, the harsher the punishment would be. She recalled the palpable tension on the Duke's face at the villa's dinner table when the news of the Imperial inspector's arrival came. Vivian realized these men were here to monitor Rahel and try to get information about her. The knight asked Vivian to step outside to talk for a moment, but her father intervened, stepping in front of her and saying they could talk here, which surprised Vivian. The knight scoffed at her father's concern, wondering if he really thought an Imperial knight would kidnap a child. Vivian's father calmly replied that he believed the knight was single, and this is how a father with a daughter feels, asking for his understanding. But the knight wasn't buying it and threatened him, saying that his words were an Imperial order and defying it was considered treason. Vivian felt anxious, realizing that if a conflict broke out, her father would surely lose, because despite his muscular build, he was not a warrior, and she knew in that moment she had to protect him. Vivian intervened in the conversation, asking the knight what he wanted to talk about. The knight told her he heard she was the young lady's playmate and hoped to ask her some questions about the young lady, which confirmed Vivian's suspicions. She believed that as Rahel's friend, she couldn't easily give information about her to the Emperor's side, and she realized that none of these men were married. Vivian decided to use an effective weapon against them, the exhaustion that comes from talking to a 9-year-old child. After a while, the knights showed signs of fatigue as they were cornered by Vivian, who relentlessly peppered them with questions, especially the word why. One of them tried to explain the situation, pointing out that His Majesty the King was not on good terms with the young lady, so it was difficult to ask her directly. Vivian feigned shock and pressed them with why, which bewildered the knight. Another knight tried to smooth things over, claiming His Majesty was a benevolent man who cared for all his subjects and was simply curious about how the young lady was doing since she was traveling far away. Vivian pretended to be convinced, then decided to use the change the subject attack. She asked innocently if that were the case, why wasn't he concerned about her and her father, since they were also the Emperor's subjects? The knight, somewhat flustered, struggled to keep up with her, insisting that of course the Emperor was curious about them too, and asked about her well-being and her relationship with the young lady. Vivian realized this man was not easy to deal with, and was trying to steer the conversation back to Rahel, so she decided to use her final move, the nonsensical bragging attack. Vivian began to ramble on about her adventures, how she became the leader of the neighborhood kids, and how she went to the haunted house in the forest to test her courage. The knight suddenly interrupted her, anxiously asking, "Did the young lady go with you to that haunted house?" Vivian denied it, explaining that the young lady wasn't even in the village at the time. The knight yelled at her in anger, wanting to know why she was telling them this now. Surrounded by the knights, Vivian feigned innocence and shed tears. Then she said in a sad tone that they were the ones who asked how she was doing, then pouted and said she wouldn't tell them anything anymore. The knight tried to placate her, explaining he just wanted to know if her relationship with the young lady was good, and then asked her directly, "Have you ever seen the young lady use magic?" This made Vivian realize they had finally reached the core issue. The first emperor of the Hildian Empire was a great magician. Because of this, most of his descendants were born with immense magical power, and the throne was inherited by the most powerful descendant. However, from time to time, a descendant would rebel against this system. One of them was the former prince, Rahel's father. As a powerful magician, he coveted the throne and was executed for treason. Since then, the emperor has kept Rahel under close surveillance. He feared that Rahel, who inherited the royal family's power, might start a rebellion just like her father. Vivian feigned ignorance, saying she didn't think she had seen anything like that. But the knight pressed her to think harder. At that point, her father intervened and cut him off, saying that was enough and that he wouldn't get the answers he wanted from a 9-year-old child. The knight was frustrated, thinking it was a waste of time, but he warned Vivian's father not to speak of what happened today. Then he approached him, saying he looked somewhat familiar, and asked if they had met before. Vivian's father denied it with a smile, claiming it was the first time he had ever seen him. Vivian was surprised by this, as her father's appearance was not ordinary, not the kind of face that was easily forgotten. After giving up, the knights left the bakery. As soon as they were gone, Vivian's father asked her not to go to the Ducal mansion for a while, citing that the butler had told him they had guests. But Vivian felt anxious, worrying that the Duke had already begun to suspect her, especially since people from the Imperial palace showed up the moment she became Rahel's playmate. She felt frustrated because she had worked so hard for this opportunity, and she wondered if there was a way to dispel these suspicions. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her eyes, and she shouted, "I've got it!" She knelt before her father, who was preparing dinner, and then ran to the basement. She was certain that if she showed the Duke that thing, his suspicions would completely vanish. A week later, Rahel sat by the window, bored and tired, thinking that Vivian was no different from all the other children she had met. She remembered how she used to receive apology letters from them, with flimsy excuses, like a sick relative or the birth of a younger sibling. At first, she always believed them and wrote back, until her nanny told her the cruel truth. The nanny told her that no one came because she was the daughter of a traitor, and they feared being punished by the emperor for getting close to her. But the nanny comforted her, saying that she and Sally would always be by her side. From that day on, Rahel realized everything was futile and decided not to have expectations for anyone. But she remembered Vivian's enthusiastic words, saying she admired her. Although she knew Vivian would soon leave her, and she was supposed to be indifferent about it, she still felt very sad and asked herself in her heart why it hurt so much. While Rahel was in her room, she heard a knock on the door and wondered if it was Vivian coming to visit her. But it was the nanny's daughter, Sally, who came in, greeting her and asking with false innocence if she was reading. Sally walked towards Rahel, who was standing in front of the bookshelf, and tried to convince her to take a break, reminding her that it wasn't time for studying. Then she enthusiastically suggested playing with dolls or role-playing, trying to get her attention. But Rahel completely ignored her and turned to take a book from the shelf, which confused Sally, who wondered to herself about the reason for this blatant disregard. Sally felt a surge of resentment. Rahel had always been a person of few words, but it had never been this bad before. She recalled the scene of Vivian talking to Rahel on the stairs and blamed it all on that annoying village girl, thinking she was the reason for Rahel's change. Sally tried to make Rahel jealous, asking sarcastically if she was happy that the annoying girl wasn't coming anymore, adding that her presence had even hindered her from reading. She continued in a vicious tone, claiming that Vivian was just pretending to be kind and friendly and that she knew from the start a girl like her would run away soon. And she tried to comfort her and promised to always stay by her side. But Rahel coldly cut her off, telling her to get out. Sally was shocked by her sudden reaction and asked in confusion what she meant. Rahel repeated her command in a sharp tone and with a cold gaze, explaining that she was telling her to leave because she was very annoying. Shaking with rage, Sally left the mansion, kicking over a flower pot in her path out of anger. She screamed furiously in her mind, blaming everything on Vivian. Then she revealed her true anger, wondering how that country bumpkin dared to seduce the person who was going to be her husband. Sally remembered a past conversation with her mother, where her mother told her that her master was currently living as a girl due to circumstances, but when she grew up, she would become a man and marry her. Back then, little Sally had asked her mother in surprise if she was going to marry Rahel. Her mother had answered in the affirmative, stressing that this was why she was staying by the young lady's side to play with her. Snapping back to the present, she screamed at the top of her lungs, asserting that no matter what Vivian did, Rahel would end up marrying her. Suddenly, her shouts were interrupted by the voice of a man from behind her, which made her freeze in shock. The man asked about the story she had just told. He approached her with a sly smile and, in a mysterious tone, asked her to tell him more. The man clarified his request, explaining that he wanted to know more about the young lady who was a girl and how he could become her husband in the future. Late that night, the butler Owen was reporting to the Duke, telling him that the inspectors would be returning to the capital the day after tomorrow. The Duke was surprised by this news, commenting that he had thought they would stay for at least a month since they had come all this way. The Duke thought to himself that although it seemed on the surface that the Imperial family had ordered them to check on the lords who had moved to the countryside, the real purpose must have been surveillance. The Duke grabbed the report in front of him, thinking that the fact they were withdrawing the surveillance personnel they had taken the trouble to send so quickly gave him an ominous feeling. At that moment, he remembered his late daughter's last request before she died, when she begged him to protect Rahel, to protect his grandson. The Duke ordered in a firm tone to strengthen the security of the villa. Owen then told him that he had gathered the information the Duke had requested about Vivian Hessen and her father, Diaz Hessen. The Duke thought that the timing of the inspector's visit coinciding with the child's entry into the mansion was a very strange coincidence. Although he had brought her back himself, which made it unlikely that she was connected to the Emperor, he stressed that since the investigation had already begun, it was best to confirm it himself. The butler Owen began to state the information he had gathered about Vivian's father, explaining that his name was Diaz Hessen. He was 29 years old and was currently running a bakery in the village, and his relationship with the villagers was very friendly. The Duke asked about his wife, and Owen replied that she was said to have died before he and his daughter settled in the village 5 years ago, and that the father did not seem to have originally been a baker, but no one knew about his mysterious past. The Duke then wanted to know if the Emperor's men had contacted Vivian's father, and Owen replied that on the day the inspectors arrived, the knights were reported to have visited the bakery. But from their conversation, it seemed they didn't get much information, and there had been no other contact so far. After that, Owen told the Duke that there was something else to give him regarding the matter, and placed a pink notebook with a rabbit pattern on it in front of him, which looked like a child's diary. As the Duke was confused, Owen explained that it was a report from Vivian to his grace, in which she mentioned that she had monitored and analyzed the Imperial Knights. The Duke was surprised by his words, wondering how that child could do such a thing and why she was concerned about the Imperial Knights. Owen remembered the scene when Vivian handed him the notebook, and when he asked her why she was presenting it to the Duke. She replied with a bright and confident smile that she was, of course, on the Duke's side. Owen concluded his conversation by confirming to the Duke that the child was on his side. The Duke opened the notebook and found that it was indeed a diary, in which Vivian wrote about meeting 3 knights after a hearty meal and described them in her own way. One was tall, another was thin, and the leader was of medium build. Vivian continued in her diary that the knights had asked her if the young lady was well, and if she had ever been seen using magic. She also mentioned later seeing them asking the grocery store owner about the goods delivered to the Ducal mansion, and if there were any strange items among them. A faint smile appeared on the Duke's face as he thought to himself that he had felt this way since he first met her. He realized that she was a clever child with a talent for handling difficult situations. The Duke considered this a useful talent they had acquired and immediately ordered the butler to summon Vivian the next day. Vivian rushed towards the Ducal mansion, her mind preoccupied with Rahel's condition. She told herself that Rahel probably wasn't waiting for her, but she longed to see her as soon as possible. When she arrived, she caught a glimpse of Rahel from a distance, and her heart filled with joy. She waved enthusiastically and called out Miss to her, but Rahel turned and walked away as if she hadn't heard. Vivian, confused, wondered if she had really not heard and ran after her, calling out again. When she finally caught up, Rahel turned and looked at her coldly. She sternly asked her the reason for her return and if she had come to say goodbye like everyone else, ordering her to go back where she came from because she didn't need it. Vivian was shocked by the word goodbye. Rahel accused her of being afraid of her too, worried that staying by the side of a traitor's daughter would bring harm to her and her family. Vivian realized at that moment that this was how all of Rahel's past friends had abandoned her, and that she was angry now because she believed Vivian would also abandon her just for not visiting for a few days. Vivian thought that it was the fear of being hurt again that had closed the child's heart. Even though she was the villain in the novel, deep down she was just a child afraid of being abandoned. Vivian decided to tell Rahel the truth, that she was not afraid of her and never intended to leave her. When Vivian caught up with Rahel again, Rahel stopped and looked at her warily. Vivian thought to herself that it didn't matter if Rahel distanced herself from her. She would be the one to close that distance. As Rahel started to walk away again, Vivian ran cheerfully towards her, asking her to walk together, determined to stay by her side until she won her trust. Vivian watched Rahel training seriously with a wooden sword, relentlessly striking a practice dummy. Vivian noticed the determination and exhaustion on Rahel's face, wondering if she was pushing herself too hard. She was filled with worry, thinking that if she continued to practice at this exhausting pace, she might get hurt. As if her worries came true, the wooden sword in Rahel's hand suddenly broke from the force of a blow, causing an injury to her face. Vivian was terrified, shouted her name, and immediately rushed towards her to check on her. When she reached her side, she noticed blood on Rahel's face and anxiously asked if she was okay. But Rahel suddenly flinched and pushed Vivian's hand away, yelling at her to get away, leaving Vivian in a state of shock and confusion. Rahel quickly got up and ran away, while Vivian called after her, trying to stop her, determined to clear up the misunderstanding and tell her the truth. She was determined to prove to Rahel that she would never leave her. But at that critical moment, a severe attack of her illness struck, and she fell to her knees, clutching her chest. She collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, but her only thought was the need to catch up with Rahel. She was in excruciating pain, muttering to herself that the pain was unbearable. She thought that if she could just touch Rahel's hand now, the pain would disappear instantly. But after learning about Rahel's psychological trauma, she flatly rejected the idea. She could no longer use her as a cure for her illness, so she decided to endure the pain and catch up with her quickly. She forced herself to stand up, her only thought being to hurry so that Rahel wouldn't be hurt any further. As her vision began to blur, she heard a voice calling her name, but she could no longer think clearly. Before she completely lost consciousness, she felt someone holding her. It was Rahel, who had turned back after hearing her fall. At that moment, Rahel's memory went back to the past, and she remembered her decision to end the relationship with Vivian before she became more attached. She was convinced that Vivian would eventually abandon her, fearing that associating with a traitor's daughter would bring harm to her and her family. So she wanted to give her up before she herself got hurt. Nevertheless, when she heard her fall and turned to find her unconscious on the ground, the scene brought her back to a painful childhood memory when she saw her mother lying on the ground in the same way while she desperately tried to wake her up. The memory faded, and Rahel returned to reality, running towards Vivian with all her might, shouting her name. Rahel sat by Vivian's bed, begging her to open her eyes. She told her that she would accept her farewell now, that she could turn her back on her and leave. She just wanted her to live. At the same time, a man named Sir Brian burst into the room, anxiously asking Rahel what had happened, as they all thought it was her who had fainted. Rahel ignored him and whispered in a faint voice, asking him to save her. With a look full of sorrow and despair, she begged him again to save the child. Sir Brian was surprised by his young master's reaction. This was the first time he had seen him in this state since the day his mother, Lady Isabella, passed away. He remembered that even at her funeral, he had not shed a single tear. He thought to himself that it was a relief to see him show emotion again. But Sir Brian realized that the situation could be dangerous, not only because of Vivian's health, but also because it could trigger his young master's deep psychological trauma. As he was thinking about this, he placed the medical kit on the floor to prepare for the examination. Sir Brian approached the anxiously seated Rahel, and after a quick look at Vivian, he reassured her that based on the girl's appearance, Her condition did not seem critical and told her he would begin the examination immediately. Sir Brian began to examine Vivian, who was lying on the bed. Meanwhile, the door to the room slowly opened, and the nanny, Margaret, walked in. She said to Rahel that it was time for her etiquette lesson, but she was quickly stunned by the scene before her, with the doctor by the unconscious child's bed, and she wondered in surprise what had happened to her. Sir Brian answered, explaining that they had told him she had suddenly fainted, and although there were no obvious external injuries, he still needed to conduct a thorough examination to be sure. A sly smile appeared on the nanny's face, as if the news stirred something other than concern in her heart. The nanny walked over to Rahel, placed a hand on her shoulder, and noting that her face looked very pale, suggested that she go and rest for a while. But Rahel rejected her request with a single, harsh word. Rahel's insistence on staying until the examination was over angered the nanny. The nanny then told her that she would allow it if staying made Rahel feel comfortable, even postponing the etiquette lesson until tomorrow. Rahel responded with a quiet thank you. As the nanny walked away, she thought angrily that the only reason her master had challenged her and refused to go with her was because of that little vixen. The nanny admitted to herself that she had found the child annoying for some time, and this situation was the perfect opportunity for her. She saw in her illness an excellent chance to drive her out of the mansion for good. She realized her plan to tame Rahel had begun 5 years ago, on the day his mother, Lady Isabella, died. She remembered how she had constantly intimidated the young Rahel, warning him that if he left the mansion, His Majesty the Emperor would look upon him with resentment, and everyone would follow suit. She planted fear in his heart that the truth of his being male would endanger everyone in the mansion, and that the Duke himself might abandon him to save the rest of the family. But after all these threats, she always soothed him with her promise that she would stay by his side until the day she died. She admitted to herself that it was easy to tame a helpless child, and the sole goal of this taming was to fulfill her ambitions for Rahel. Even though he was living as a girl now, as he grew, he wouldn't be able to hide the truth of his being a man forever. She was well aware that the Duke also knew this fact, which was why he was secretly training Rahel in magic. Because once Rahel became strong enough to protect himself, he would abandon this disguise and take his place as the young Duke Delphin. By then, if she and her daughter Sally were the only ones he could rely on, it was highly likely that Sally would become the future Duchess. But that commoner child was now a source of trouble, as she had somehow managed to win the favor of the arrogant Duke Colts. She had even succeeded in getting Rahel to leave the mansion, something no one had been able to do before. The nanny smiled slyly. If the child was truly ill, they would have no choice but to send her home. She had intended to intimidate and drive her away, just like Rahel's other friends, but the current situation made things much simpler. The nanny went straight to the Duke's office, knocked on the door, and told him she had something to discuss. She informed the Duke that the child who had been brought in as a playmate had suddenly collapsed. She confirmed this to him, adding that Sir Brian was examining her and that her young lady insisted on staying by the girl's side, so she had allowed it for the time being. Then, she began to implement the next step of her plan, feigning concern by saying that she hoped this was not the case. But if the child were seriously ill, she worried it would cause the young lady immense grief and pain. The Duke pondered the nanny's words, realizing she was subtly suggesting he separate Vivian and Rahel, and saw that her point did have some merit. Rahel, despite his young age, already understood the concept of death very well after the pain of losing his mother. The Duke thought that if Vivian were to die for any reason, it would undoubtedly destroy his grandson. As the Duke was lost in thought, the nanny left his office with a faint, triumphant smile. Meanwhile, Vivian, lying in bed, was slowly regaining consciousness. She opened her eyes heavily, confusedly wondering what had happened and where she was now. She looked around and realized she was lying in a strange bed she had never seen before. Suddenly, she remembered the sharp pain that had come from her heart just moments ago. She remembered how she had been chasing after Rahel, and then everything went dark. She sat up abruptly in a panic, realizing she had fainted, and her first thought was to check on Rahel, but she was shocked when she turned her head to find Rahel sitting quietly by her bedside. She was incredibly surprised, wondering if she had been watching over her the whole time. Rahel, pale and with eyes full of worry, looked at her and asked if she was all right, which surprised Vivian, as she had never seen her look so concerned. Vivian immediately apologized realized and tried to comfort her, saying she wasn't scared and that her illness wasn't serious, as she'd had it for several years. At the same time, she wondered inwardly if it was Rahel who had carried her here. Rahel asked in surprise if she had been sick for years, and Vivian realized she had just admitted to hiding her condition. She had planned to tell her after winning her and the Duke's trust, and now she was terrified that she would reject her for being a sick child. Vivian felt hopeless and whispered to herself that it was all over. She looked at Rahel's face, which seemed angry, and assumed she was upset because she had hidden her illness. But Rahel asked in a different tone, wanting to know if she fainted every time. Vivian quickly denied it, explaining that this was the first time she had lost consciousness and that the pain usually subsided after 20 minutes. Then, in a trembling voice, Rahel asked if she had already been feeling the pain before she got close. Vivian panicked, not knowing what to say, worried she would be sent away and stripped of her status as a friend. But Rahel posed a question full of self-blame. If she was in pain, why didn't she tell her? She continued in a low voice with her head down, admitting that she thought Vivian was dying because of her. In that moment, Vivian realized that Rahel was genuinely worried about her. Vivian thought that Rahel might become a cold and ruthless villain in the distant future. But the person before her now was just a child with a pure heart, sincerely worried about a friend. Vivian realized that Rahel was no longer just a character in a novel, but her friend, and so she decided to tell her the truth. She told her that she had endured the pain and waited because she had something important to tell her. Vivian gripped Rahel's hand tightly and told her sincerely that even if she was the daughter of a traitor, she wasn't afraid of her because she had done nothing wrong. She went on to explain that she had been treated unfairly, even though she had done nothing, and that when a friend is treated unfairly, one shouldn't run away, but should trust and help them. She squeezed her hand harder, ending with a firm promise she would stay by her side. This left Rahel in a state of surprise and complete silence. Before Vivian could finish her promise, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. The butler requested permission to enter for a moment, and Rahel granted it. The door opened, and butler Owen and Nanny Margaret walked in. This confused Vivian. She was overcome with anxiety, wondering why they had come together, and she felt they might be there to scold her for hiding her illness. But the butler spoke to her in a friendly tone, asking how she was feeling after hearing she had collapsed. Vivian replied that she was fine, thanks to the young lady calling for a doctor in time. Vivian sensed the butler's relief, but she noticed the nanny's expression seemed to be hiding something, which gave her an ominous feeling about the situation. The butler went on to suggest that it would be best for her to rest at home just in case, as exertion during an illness could make things worse. Vivian was shocked and asked anxiously if this meant she shouldn't come to the mansion for a while. The butler confirmed this, but promised they would provide all possible assistance for her to recover and return soon. Vivian immediately realized that his words, while seemingly for her benefit, were actually meant to keep her away from Rahel, as it was unsafe for a child with an unknown illness to remain by the Ducal heir's side. Vivian looked at the nanny, standing there confidently, and realized this was why she had looked so certain earlier. But a faint smile appeared on Vivian's face as she realized her illness was actually beneficial for Rahel. She was very confident that, once the Ducal family discovered the truth about her condition, they would want to keep her by Rahel's side. But the problem was how to convince them. Although she wasn't an expert, she believed that diagnosing a magic-related illness required someone who could use magic, a complicated process. And the worst-case scenario was that they would just send her away, but she decided to give it a try. Just then, Sir Brian burst into the room, excitedly calling out to Rahel. The doctor apologized for the intrusion, explaining that he had discovered the name of the child's condition and had rushed to tell them. The butler asked if he had really found the name of the illness. The doctor confirmed it, and most importantly, it wasn't contagious. The butler then asked what the illness was, and Sir Brian, with a brilliant smile, announced that her symptoms were a perfect match for a rare condition known as magic overload. Vivian felt immensely happy. She needed an expert, and she was in luck. In stark contrast, the nanny's face was visibly filled with anger as she realized her plan had failed. Vivian whispered inwardly that this was the nanny's bad luck. The doctor told Vivian they had the means to treat her condition, and she cheered that he was the best doctor. Later in the Duke's office, the butler confirmed to his master that Sir Brian had diagnosed the child's condition as magic overload, and since the doctor could read magic power, the diagnosis was certain to be correct. The Duke ordered the butler to only tell Vivian that they had a way to alleviate her symptoms, without needing to tell her about Rahel's special constitution and his ability to absorb magic power. The Duke thought to himself how fortunate it was that this child could be Rahel's playmate, as it was beneficial for both of them. It was a fantastic irony that in the very village they had moved to in order to hide Rahel's power, there lived a child with a rare disease that could further enhance that power. Even more miraculously, this child had become his playmate. The Duke thought these astonishing coincidences were almost suspicious, but he concluded that life did occasionally bring such good fortune. The butler added that the young lady seemed to be very fond of Vivian as well, which surprised the Duke. The Duke admitted to himself that he had only brought her here to cover up the truth that Rahel was a boy and had never expected them to get along so well. The Duke seemed pleased with this news, and as he gazed out the window, he caught a glimpse of Vivian and her father by the carriage. He had rushed over to pick her up after learning his daughter had collapsed, but as the Duke watched the father holding his daughter, he felt his face looked somewhat familiar. Although he was sure he had never seen him before, there was a strange familiarity in his features. The Duke continued to think about Vivian's father, realizing he reminded him of someone. His memory drifted back to the image of a mysterious, white-haired man amidst the fires of battle, and he wondered to himself if he really did look like that man. But he quickly dismissed the thought that man was dead, and considering the circumstances at the time, it was impossible for him to be the same person. He decided it wouldn't hurt to confirm, though. As the carriage departed, the Duke gave an order to butler Owen to investigate Dias Hessen's past thoroughly. Meanwhile, Vivian was overjoyed because everything was progressing perfectly. Most importantly, she had become Rahel's true friend. She was filled with enthusiasm, determined to make Rahel trust her completely, and promised herself to make her happy. Suddenly, she felt a sharp gaze pierce through her, causing her to freeze on the spot. When she turned her head, she was surprised to see her father sitting in front of her, not wearing the glasses he usually wore. He looked so handsome that she didn't recognize him at first, and she curiously asked why he wasn't wearing his glasses. Her father playfully replied that he was so absent-minded he had forgotten them, and mentioned that it was no wonder men were staring at him. Vivian jokingly asked what would happen if she ended up charming men too. Vivian noticed that although he spoke jokingly, his eyes were trembling. Whenever she was in pain, her father was always terrified. Vivian remembered her father telling her in the past that her mother had died from an illness when she was very young, and that his family had disowned him even before he married her. Vivian realized she was now his only family, and he must have been severely shocked when he heard she had collapsed. Vivian couldn't help but rush to her father and hug him tightly. She comforted him not to worry too much, promising she would listen to the doctor, get well soon, and live with him for a long time. Her father gently hugged her back, accepting her promise. Vivian thought she could hear a hint of a sob in her father's voice, but she decided to pretend not to notice, as it was a bit embarrassing for a grown man to cry. She consoled herself that the reason she also felt choked up was not because she was moved by his emotions. For the sake of her poor father, who had no one else in the world but her, she was determined to give this story a happy ending, no matter the cost. A few days after that incident, everything at the Ducal mansion proceeded as usual, but if one thing had changed, it was that when Vivian arrived at the mansion, she found Rahel waiting for her outside. So she playfully asked if she was waiting for her, which Rahel immediately denied. Vivian approached her and whispered in her ear that she was sure she was waiting for her, but Rahel's persistent denial made it clear to Vivian that Rahel was indeed waiting for her. Vivian continued to tease her, saying she really looked like she was waiting, and asked why she was outside. After a moment of silence, Rahel replied in confusion that she had only come out to tell her to go straight to the mansion instead of the greenhouse. Vivian thought it was a poor excuse. She could have just sent a maid to tell her, so why come in person? She was absolutely certain she had been waiting for her, and was just too shy to admit it. Vivian decided to let it go for now and excitedly asked what they would play today, to which Rahel replied that she hadn't thought of anything yet. As they walked together, Vivian suddenly suggested they check out the library. She explained excitedly that she had seen it the day before, and it looked so grand that she was dying to see the inside. Out of sheer excitement, Vivian subconsciously grabbed Rahel's hand, but she quickly realized what she had done and froze on the spot, thinking in a panic, "What have I done?" Anxiety filled her heart because she had grabbed her hand without thinking, and she thought that Rahel might have only allowed it last time because she felt sorry for her for fainting. Vivian was gripped by fear, wondering if Rahel would shake her hand off, as she tried to encourage herself to stay calm and not panic. But just then, Butler Owen, who had just arrived, interrupted them, telling Vivian it was time for her meeting. Vivian turned to find the butler standing there. She greeted him, and he asked how she had been. Vivian replied excitedly that she was feeling much better, so the butler told her he was glad to hear it, then added seriously that the Duke was looking for her. Vivian was shocked by the sudden request, wondering confusedly why the Duke wanted to see her. Vivian found herself sitting face to face with the Duke for the first time, while he quietly sipped his tea. Vivian thought the Duke didn't seem like a bad person, but he was very stern, so she resolved not to show any weakness in front of him. After a moment of silence, the Duke took the initiative to ask if she knew about the Emperor's opinion of Rahel, and she replied that the young lady had told her some things the day before. But the Duke interrupted her, clarifying that he wasn't asking about that, but wanted to know if she understood the relationship between him and the Emperor before she spoke with Rahel. Vivian realized he was referring to the report she had sent him earlier. She remembered returning home that day to find 3 knights waiting for her. Now, they were asking about the young lady's condition and whether she had seen the young lady use magic. Vivian realized this man was not a simple opponent, and that lying would be futile. Honesty was better than getting caught in a naive lie. She admitted to him that she already knew because she had heard the village elders talk about it. Then, the Duke directly asked her what she thought of His Majesty the Emperor, a question she had never anticipated. Confusion enveloped her, as she knew the Duke and the Emperor were like fire and water, and she wondered if she was allowed to criticize the Emperor in front of him. She thought that, despite everything, the Emperor was still the ruler of this land, and it might seem rude if she started bad-mouthing him just because she had the chance, and she doubted if that was really the answer the Duke wanted. She decided to answer cautiously, saying she wasn't quite sure, as she had never seen the Emperor in person before. The Duke looked at her sternly, saying he was well aware she wasn't summoned here to give such an ambiguous answer. Vivian gathered her courage and said that she had learned not to judge a person solely based on what others say. So she didn't have many thoughts about the Emperor, but there was one thing she was sure of, and that was that it was wrong to punish a child for the sins of their father. She concluded by asserting that this was why she wanted to stay by the young lady's side. The Duke, with a hint of a smile, asked if she sympathized with the child, and Vivian wondered if it was presumptuous for a commoner girl to say she sympathized with a young noble lady. The Duke told her that he liked people who stood by their beliefs, and that he already had enough dogs wagging their tails to please him. He explained that he wanted to hire a person, not a loyal dog. Someone who could suggest a different path when he lost his way and stop him when he was about to make a mistake. An intelligent person with an independent mind. The Duke looked at her with appreciation and told her that she had impressed him in that regard. Then, he solemnly announced that he had decided to become her patron. Vivian was completely stunned, unable to process what he had just said. The Duke explained that when nobles find a promising seed, they nurture it from a young age. He asked her to become someone useful to him, and in time, to Rahel as well. Of course, he added, this meant she would have to come to the villa every day for lessons and studies. Then he asked softly if she would hate that. Vivian immediately and enthusiastically replied that she wouldn't hate it at all. On the contrary, she was very eager. A faint smile appeared on the Duke's face, and Vivian assured him she would do her absolute best for him. After leaving the Duke's office, Vivian couldn't contain her joy and began to dance and twirl happily in the hallway. She felt an indescribable happiness. The feeling of being acknowledged was truly wonderful. Suddenly, her joy was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Rahel, who startled Vivian by asking what she was doing. Without hesitation, Vivian rushed towards Rahel and hugged her tightly. She excitedly told her that the Duke had decided to become her patron, which meant they could study together every day, and asked if that wasn't wonderful. Rahel seemed confused, and Vivian noticed her face was redder than usual. Vivian placed her hand on Rahel's face and anxiously asked if she was feeling unwell, but Rahel shied away, telling her to back off a little, and Vivian realized her actions might have been too intimate. Vivian immediately apologized, explaining she was so happy she couldn't help herself. Rahel replied that it was good news regardless. Vivian playfully asked if she was happy too, but Rahel remained silent. Vivian changed the subject, asking again why she was outside and if she had been waiting for her. Rahel calmly replied that she was on her way to the library. She then held out her hand to her, reminding her that she was the one who said she wanted to see it. Vivian was so immersed in happiness, she could hardly believe what was happening. Rahel had actually been the first to reach out her hand. Rahel teased her, saying she could forget it if she didn't want to go, but Vivian firmly grabbed her hand, asserting that she wanted to go. In fact, she really wanted to go. As they walked side by side, Vivian felt a slight tingle in their clasped hands, but she didn't let go for a long time. Meanwhile, in the Imperial palace, one of the Emperor's men was telling him that the newborn was not a daughter, but a son. The young Emperor, sitting on his throne, burst into a fit of hysterical laughter. Then he stopped abruptly and said in a grim tone that he knew it. No wonder he looked so much like his father. His memory flashed back to before he was appointed crown prince, when, out of intense jealousy, he tried to kill his younger brother Leofrid, who always outshone him. He remembered how much he regretted at the moment he saw his brother drink the poison, and how Leofrid had miraculously survived. But he felt deep remorse when he heard Leofrid plead with their father, the Emperor, saying the position rightfully belonged to his older brother, who truly cared for the people. In that moment, rage consumed him, and he cursed himself, wishing he had confirmed his death back then. He feared that if things continued this way, his brother would reclaim the throne he had already given up, and he would live the rest of his life in his brother's shadow. And so, he resolved to kill Leofrid. And so, he sat on the throne he had seized with blood-stained hands. He was supposed to be the final victor, but his thoughts were interrupted by an aide who entered and informed him that the missing Lady Asila had returned with a child. The Emperor was shocked. Asila was the woman who had run away after Leofrid's death, right before their engagement. So if this was her child, could it be? He then sharply demanded to know who the child's father was. The aide replied in confusion that they didn't know who the father was yet, but the Emperor cut him off with a shout, declaring he would go see for himself. His memory returned to that day when, driven by an overwhelming anxiety, he went to the Edelfin Ducal estate. He remembered whispering his late brother Leofrid's name in shock when he first saw the child. He had recognized him at first glance. The child was Leofrid's son, the son of the brother he had framed for treason and ordered to be executed. After Rahel was born, he tried to console himself that there was no need to worry, that she was just a girl and couldn't threaten his position. But his brother's ghost continued to haunt him. He would see his specter asking him in a pained voice why he had to kill him when he had already given up the throne for him. The Emperor let out a scream of terror, trying to push away the ghost that had begun to appear before him constantly. He admitted to himself that even knowing she was a girl, he had never felt at ease, and now he finally understood why. A ghost who had left behind an heir. The Emperor decided in a malicious tone that he must kill him, too. Meanwhile, at the Ducal estate, the teacher announced that today's lesson was over, reminding Vivian and Rahel that reviewing was more important than preparing for the next lesson. Vivian thanked him enthusiastically, while Rahel silently held her books. After the teacher left, Rahel turned to Vivian and said calmly, "Let's go, Vivian." Vivian felt immense happiness walking side by side, feeling that they had now become true friends. As they walked down the hallway, Rahel playfully commented that Vivian always greeted people with such enthusiasm, then accused her of not actually finding the lessons interesting and just pretending to pay attention. Vivian immediately denied it, asserting that she genuinely found the lessons interesting, but Rahel called her a liar. Vivian insisted she wasn't lying, so Rahel, with a sly smile, asked about the drawings, the one she had drawn in her book earlier. Vivian was shocked, wondering when Rahel could have seen them. Flustered, Vivian claimed she was reviewing her art lesson, since reviewing was more important than preparing. But Rahel wasn't convinced and asked about her, dozing off with her eyes half open during philosophy class. Vivian realized Rahel hadn't been listening to the lesson at all, but had been watching her the whole time. Although she admitted to herself that it was her fault, she still felt a bit embarrassed. Vivian pleaded with Rahel not to tell the Duke, and Rahel replied that it would depend on her behavior. Vivian complained that was too mean, but she suddenly noticed Rahel was smiling. Vivian was captivated by her beauty, thinking she was even prettier when she smiled. She wondered to herself why she never smiled before. It was such a shame. But Rahel's smile quickly vanished. Vivian was surprised by the sudden change in her expression. Just then, the Duke and the butler appeared on the stairs, and Vivian wondered if the Duke was about to go out. Vivian bowed respectfully in greeting, and the Duke asked her how her lessons were today. She replied enthusiastically that they were fun, suddenly worrying that Rahel would expose her secret about sleeping. But when she looked at Rahel, she saw that she was completely silent, seemingly with no intention of saying anything. Vivian wondered in confusion if this silence was because the Duke was present. The Duke told the butler, Owen, that they would leave now, then gave the two girls permission to go and continue playing. So Vivian bid them farewell, wishing them a safe journey. Watching the Duke leave, Vivian commented that the Duke didn't look very happy, and despite that, she hoped in her heart that their relationship would improve, as Rahel was his only family. Vivian wondered to herself if she should intervene to break the silence, then enthusiastically suggested to Rahel that they go have some snacks, playfully claiming it wasn't because she herself wanted sweets. The two girls sat on the garden balcony eating dessert, and Vivian savored every bite while noticing that Rahel was eating slowly and distractedly. Vivian reminded herself in that moment of her primary goal. Vivian initiated a conversation, asking Rahel if anything was bothering or troubling her, explaining that friends should share what's on their minds. She added that when friends are sad, they comfort each other. When they're angry, they take each other's side, and they even exchange secrets they can't tell anyone else, thus growing closer. Rahel replied that she didn't have anything like that. Vivian thought that perhaps Rahel had never talked about these things with anyone before, to the point that she didn't realize her own feelings. So she decided to give her an example. Vivian sighed and said that she herself had a worry. She told her that her father had cut ties with his family when he married her mother because they had strongly opposed the marriage. She added that even when she asked about her grandparents, her father wouldn't give a clear answer and would just smile, expressing her wish that they could reconnect and reconcile. Rahel listened in complete silence. This was indeed a real worry for Vivian, but deep down, she hoped Rahel would connect this story to the strained relationship between her and her grandfather, the Duke. Rahel's comment surprised Vivian, as she pointed out that perhaps her father was afraid his family wouldn't accept him. She explained that just being family doesn't guarantee forgiveness, and if the relationship were to break again, he would be deeply hurt. Vivian realized she had never considered her father's feelings this way, and that Rahel was probably right. In that moment, she understood that Rahel herself was likely afraid that her grandfather would reject her. Vivian then directly asked Rahel if she had any worries concerning the Duke, but Rahel denied it. Vivian decided not to press her, realizing the time wasn't right, but she assured her that if she had any fears in the future, she could always come and talk to her. Rahel asked in surprise if she meant talk to her, and Vivian replied that, of course, because they were friends. Vivian added that a friend is to share weal and woe. She concluded that, of course, one shouldn't force themselves to speak up, but during difficult times, one shouldn't keep everything bottled up inside either. Their conversation was interrupted by the nanny, Margaret, who came to tell Rahel it was time for her next lesson. Vivian wondered if this was the air training that Rahel took alone. Just as Rahel was about to leave, Vivian bade her farewell, hoping to see her again tomorrow, while thinking that this lesson was likely the magic training mentioned in the original novel. She suddenly noticed that the nanny, Margaret, who had come to get Rahel, did not leave with her. Just then, Margaret offered to accompany Vivian out today. Vivian was surprised by this, but agreed, although the nanny's mysterious smile gave her an ominous feeling about the situation. The nanny led her down a different path, winding along the edge of the estate. Suddenly, the nanny stopped, called her name in an icy tone, and asked a shocking question, whether she knew about the crime of treason. Vivian replied to the nanny that she had learned that insulting His Majesty the Emperor and the members of the Imperial family, as well as threatening them, was considered a crime, but she was surprised by the sudden question. The nanny told Vivian she knew very well what treason was, then asked if she also knew the consequences for those found guilty, explaining that His Majesty the Emperor would mete out severe punishment. She added in a cold tone that the punishment would extend to the entire family, down to the third generation. She continued her terrifying explanation, saying that the traitor's parents would be executed by hanging, while the traitor themselves would be executed by beheading. As for the traitor's children, they would be sent to foreign lands as slaves, and all who had helped the traitor would suffer the same punishment. Vivian, shocked by the bloody description unsuitable for a 9-year-old, asked the nanny why she was telling her this. She replied coldly that Lady Rahel's father had committed treason against His Majesty the Emperor. The nanny slowly explained that this meant if Vivian stayed by her side, not only would she be in danger, but her father could also be harmed. The nanny claimed she was telling her this because she seemed unaware of the truth. In that moment, Vivian understood everything. The nanny was the culprit. She remembered Rahel's sad words and how she had anticipated that Vivian would abandon her out of fear of harm coming to herself and her family. She finally understood that this was the real reason Rahel had pushed her away. Vivian realized with anger that the nanny had scared away Rahel's other friends in the same way, forcing them to stay away from her. Vivian mustered her courage and asked the nanny why she was still by Rahel's side, warning that she and Sally could also be in danger. The nanny replied in a hypocritical tone that she was risking her life to serve the young lady, as she believed the young lady was worth it, worth the risk. Then, with a contemptuous look, she added that Vivian was still young and understood nothing, and with that mindset, she would one day regret her choice. But Vivian replied calmly and confidently that she, too, was being forced. Vivian turned and ran, leaving the stunned nanny behind. As Vivian ran, she screamed inwardly that she was also betting her life, her own life. The nanny watched Vivian's retreating back with shock and anger. Vivian was determined that she had to get Rahel away from that woman, as she didn't know if the nanny was isolating Rahel to protect her or for some other purpose. Whatever the reason, it was wrong to hurt Rahel like this, and the first thing she had to do was. The next day, Vivian took Rahel to the village, and Rahel asked why they were there. Vivian told her she was going to the general store to buy gifts for the maids, explaining that if the young lady gave them the gifts personally, she could get closer to them. Rahel wondered why she needed to get closer to the maids, so Vivian replied naively that if they had a good relationship, she could get them to sneak her snacks at night. Rahel rejected the idea, saying she didn't need that and that they would still be afraid of her anyway. Vivian admitted to herself that there was some truth to that. She believed that if Rahel wanted to become less dependent on the nanny, she had to get close to the people in the estate. Vivian tried to encourage her, saying they were only scared because they didn't know her yet, not because they disliked her. She explained with a smile that anything unknown is scary, like an unknown road or an unknown question. She assured her that once they got to know her, they wouldn't be afraid of her anymore. Vivian grabbed Rahel's hand and encouraged her to enter the store with her. As they entered, Vivian greeted the shopkeeper, Peter, who was sleeping, and he woke up startled, coughing in confusion. When Vivian and Rahel entered the general store, Peter, who had been sleeping, was surprised by their presence. He stood up in a panic and welcomed them hesitantly. When he realized it was Vivian, she teased him, saying she would tell his mom he was sleeping instead of watching the store. Peter defended himself in confusion, saying he wasn't sleeping but meditating. So Vivian laughed at him, wondering who meditates while snoring, as Rahel watched them quietly from the side. Peter tried to quickly change the subject, pretending he hadn't heard anything, and asked what they wanted to buy. Then Peter whispered to Vivian, asking if the girl with her was the young lady. After Vivian confirmed it to him, he became very nervous and greeted Rahel in a trembling voice. But suddenly, Rahel grabbed Vivian's hand and pulled her away, leaving Peter utterly confused, wondering if the young lady disliked strangers. Vivian led Rahel through the store's aisles, pointing out some products popular with the maids. Rahel asked about the boy's identity, and Vivian told her it was her friend Peter, the shopkeeper's son. Rahel asked coldly if he was also Vivian's friend. Vivian noticed her displeasure and wondered if she disliked him. Vivian confirmed he was a good friend of hers, so Rahel asked if she loved him too, to which Vivian naively replied that of course, she loved him as a friend. Rahel looked displeased, her brow furrowed, which confused Vivian, who anxiously called her name. Rahel suddenly insisted that Vivian also call her by her first name, just as she did with Peter. Vivian was surprised by her request, shocked at the idea of addressing a noble lady by her first name. But Rahel insisted it was fine as long as she allowed it. Vivian hesitantly agreed and called out, Rahel. Rahel smiled faintly, and Vivian realized her friend wanted to experience everything that friends do together. Then Rahel added that she could also speak informally with her. From the perspective of a commoner girl, it was an offer she couldn't refuse, and Vivian was overwhelmed with happiness. Vivian agreed with great enthusiasm, which made Rahel very happy. Rahel asked what gift Vivian planned to buy, and the latter replied confidently to just trust her. Later, in the carriage, Vivian fell asleep, her head resting on Rahel's shoulder. Rahel watched the sleeping Vivian with a gentle smile, noticing she was murmuring as if eating something in her dream. Rahel thought to herself that this was the first time someone other than her mother or nanny had reached out and held her hand. More precisely, Vivian was the first person to hold her hand again, the hand that Rahel had long kept from others for fear of her hidden secret being revealed. Rahel remembered the moment Vivian promised to stay by her side, how her hazel eyes had shone, and how the hand she held was soft and warm. Rahel felt she didn't want to let go of her hand for even a moment. Vivian alone was a special person because she was on her side, but it saddened her to think that to Vivian, she wasn't someone special, just one of many friends. Rahel didn't want to be just any ordinary friend. She wanted Vivian to look only at her, to hold only her hand. She wanted Vivian to love only her. As Vivian slept peacefully, Rahel whispered to herself that just as Vivian was her one and only, she wanted to be Vivian's one and only too. In the carriage, Rahel contemplated her desire to be someone special to Vivian and wondered if they should share a secret to deepen their bond. She remembered what Vivian had said before, that real friends share their feelings and secrets to become closer. Rahel hesitated for a moment, worried if revealing her secret would truly bring them closer. Her biggest fear was Vivian's reaction after discovering she was actually a boy, and whether she would still stay by her side after that. But she looked at the sleeping Vivian beside her and remembered how she had stayed even after knowing about the Emperor's surveillance, which gave her a glimmer of hope. Rahel decided to tell her the truth when she woke up. Upon arriving at the estate, Vivian got out of the carriage yawning, as the guards carried the gifts they had bought. As they walked toward the entrance, Rahel told her she had something important to tell her later, which piqued Vivian's curiosity. Rahel explained she would tell her before she went home, so Vivian, driven by intense curiosity, urged her to say it now. But Rahel gently refused, saying it wasn't the right time, which increased Vivian's confusion and curiosity. Vivian decided not to insist, realizing she had a more important task at the moment, so they agreed to talk later. Upon entering the estate, two maids greeted them with a respectful bow. Vivian quietly pushed Rahel forward, whispering words of encouragement to carry out their plan. Rahel hesitantly returned the two maids' greeting, saying she was back. The two maids, surprised by their master's response, whispered to each other in amazement. Vivian had previously told Rahel that she must respond to the servants' greetings and tell them she had brought them gifts. Rahel had successfully taken the first step, which made Vivian happy, and she eagerly waited for the part about the gifts. But shyness took over Rahel, and she hurried away, leaving Vivian to sigh, thinking she was still too shy to mention the gifts. Vivian decided to take the initiative, so she called out to the maids to get their attention and announced with a brilliant smile that the young lady had prepared gifts for all of them, much to the maids' astonishment. Vivian gathered the maids around Rahel and showed them the cosmetics she had bought, explaining that they were very famous products from the village. Vivian continued her enthusiastic description, insisting they would make their skin as soft as a child's. One of the maids expressed her delight, saying she had been planning to buy some after hearing Vivian mention them last time. Vivian then told a white lie, claiming that Rahel was sorry for her previous lack of attention and was grateful for their hard work, while Rahel watched her in shock. wondering when she had ever said such a thing. The maids were deeply moved and fervently thanked their master for her kindness. They assured her they would work even harder from now on, while Rahel stood silently, still surprised by their reaction. Seeing Rahel's surprise, Vivian felt a little sad. She realized it meant her friend had never expected that her relationship with others could change even a little through such an initiative. Later, as the maids gathered and laughed, one of them noticed Vivian's hair had gotten messy and suggested retying it for her. When Vivian looked in the mirror, she panicked, shocked at the state of her hair, and wondering when it had happened. It had happened when Vivian fell asleep in the carriage and rested her head on Rahel's shoulder. Vivian was mortified, realizing she had been walking around with messy hair all this time. So one of the maids offered to do her hair. Vivian immediately agreed, and the maid gestured to Rahel for permission, who nodded in agreement and also sat down to wait. As the maid was combing Vivian's hair, she complimented its softness and beauty, and Vivian proudly told her that her father helps her comb it every night. The maid commented that men usually find such things boring and that her father must love her very much. Vivian proudly confirmed this, adding that her father loves her dearly. The maid then jokingly asked if she had a boyfriend behind her father's back, or if there was a boy she liked, which caught Rahel's attention. Vivian noticed Rahel suddenly turn away and stop looking at her. Vivian was puzzled, wondering about the reason for Rahel's strange look. Her thoughts returned to the past, remembering how Rahel had seemed jealous of Peter and had sharply asked if she liked him too. Vivian thought that girls their age were very sensitive about the concept of a best friend, and perhaps that was why Rahel was jealous. To put her at ease, she decided to make things clear, telling her that she had no intention of getting a boyfriend at all, because those things weren't fun in the slightest. The maid was surprised by her answer, saying she was a good girl and surely many boys liked her, but Vivian complained that boys only played pranks and teased her all day, and she really hated that. The maid tried to convince her that maybe there would be a good boy who didn't like pranks, and then asked if she would never marry if she didn't get a boyfriend. But Vivian stood her ground, declaring that she didn't want to get married and would live with her father and the young lady forever. She then turned to Rahel and directly asked for her confirmation of the promise, wanting to know if she would also be her friend forever. Rahel appeared, deeply moved, and silently lowered her head, which left Vivian confused by her quiet reaction. Meanwhile, in the Duke's office, the Duke was busy with his work when he realized that May had arrived. The death anniversary of his daughter, Isella, was approaching. His thoughts returned to the sight of his daughter lying in bed, telling him that she had brought him flowers because they reminded her of her childhood. When she used to give him flowers, the Duke sighed sadly, thinking that even though it had been 5 years since she was gone, he still couldn't get used to her absence. He realized he would have to live with this pain for the rest of his life. Suddenly, a sound from outside interrupted his thoughts, and as he looked out the window, he caught a glimpse of them playing and wondered if that was Vivian. The Duke noted that since the child arrival, the mansion had become noisy and full of life, just like when his daughter Isabella was still alive. A slight smile appeared on his face, but he quickly chided himself for such a foolish thought, asserting to himself that no one could ever replace her. A moment later, he noticed the mansion had returned to its quiet state and wondered if Vivian had gone home. But to his surprise, he heard a knock on the door, followed by Vivian's voice asking for permission to enter, which left him confused and surprised, wondering why she had come to see him. He granted her entry. Vivian slowly pushed the door open, greeted him politely, and thanked him for taking the time to see her. The Duke asked the reason for her visit, and if it wasn't time for her and Rahel's lessons. She told him that the young lady had just gone to her air lessons, and that she had come only to give him something. The Duke was surprised that she had brought him something, and Vivian, with a bright smile, asked to approach him to present the gift. After the Duke allowed her to come closer, Vivian walked towards him, holding a small box, and told him it was a gift she had bought when she went to the village before, but she hadn't been able to give it to him until now, because he seemed busy. The Duke opened the box and found a delicate wooden bookmark inside. The Duke was surprised by the unexpected gift, pointing out that it wasn't his birthday and that he hadn't done anything special for her recently to deserve a gift. Vivian excitedly explained that there was no special reason, just that she saw the bookmark while buying gifts for the maids and felt she had to give it to him. The Duke teased her, asking if she had bought it reluctantly because she was worried he would be jealous, which Vivian immediately denied. She assured him that she had carefully considered and chosen something he might like, and a slight smile appeared on the Duke's face. The Duke examined the gift, noting it was made of ginkgo wood and mentioning that its scent repels insects, making it perfect for preserving books, and praised her for her good taste in picking things. The Duke assured her he would use it well. Vivian was overjoyed and then seized the opportunity to ask him if she could come and read with him from now on. The Duke was surprised by the request, wondering how the conversation had led to this, and she told him that her etiquette teacher had taught her that one can learn about a person's character from the books they read. The Duke realized she wanted to get to know him better and asked her why, to which she frankly replied that she hoped to become close to him. Then the Duke realized the gift was a bribe and, with a sly smile, asked her what she really wanted, promising that he might grant her wish if she was honest. Vivian insisted that all she wanted was to be his friend. The Duke was shocked by her strange request. He asked her in confusion why she would want that. Vivian thought to herself that she couldn't tell him she wanted to monitor his relationship with Rahel, so she replied that she thought he was a kind person. She then added that her philosophy teacher had once told her that having a good friend is like living another life, and for that reason, she wanted to be his friend. The Duke thought sarcastically to himself if the lessons were making her thinking complicated. Vivian playfully continued, saying that it would be fun to be friends and that she had many friends his age. This caused the Duke to burst out laughing, and he asked in surprise if she meant she had befriended people his age before. After a moment of thought, the Duke granted her request. He told her that she could come anytime. Vivian was immersed in happiness. From that day on, whenever Rahel went to her air lessons, Vivian would visit the Duke. Although she initially worried that her frequent visits would annoy him, he always welcomed her with snacks, and she would happily thank him. She believed in her heart that as long as he kept giving her sweets, he must like her. During one of their meetings, she told him that she had read a book in her philosophy class titled Life is a Series of Regrets. She expressed her desire to discuss the topic with him. The Duke was impressed that she was reading such a profound book at the age of 9, and the Duke asked her if she had ever had any regrets in her life. She replied that reading the book had reminded her of some past events. When he inquired about them, Vivian began to tell a story about a time she went to the forest with her father. She remembered discovering an orphan baby bird that had lost its mother. Vivian continued to tell the Duke the story of the little bird, which she had cared for with love until it grew up, and then she and her father released it back into the forest, wishing it well and bidding it farewell. However, she added in a sad tone that she had found its body in front of her house shortly after, believing it must have been bitten by a snake while trying to escape and return to them. The Duke then concluded that she regretted sending it back to the forest, which Vivian sadly confirmed, expressing deep remorse as she often thought that if she hadn't sent away, it might still be alive. The Duke tried to comfort her, explaining that well-intentioned actions don't always lead to good outcomes. But he assured her it wasn't her fault, as she had made the best choice she could at the time without knowing the future. He added that it was ultimately the little bird's own choice to fly away from her embrace, and Vivian hesitantly agreed. But she wondered in a faint voice if the bird would have stayed if she had never sent away in the first place. The Duke offered another perspective, explaining that even if it had been raised safely in a cage, it might have yearned for the outside world and held a grudge against her in its heart. The Duke advised her to stop with the endless what-ifs and focus only on what actually happened. He explained to her that the truth was the bird had lived well by her side, and when it returned to the forest, it must have enjoyed its freedom. He concluded by advising that no matter how painful the past was, she had to let it go, and assured her that the little bird would not want her to remain a prisoner of the past either. Vivian thanked him and then unexpectedly asked if he himself had ever regretted anything in his life. He began to speak of his own regrets, his voice tinged with deep remorse. He wondered in a faint voice if a life without regrets truly existed, and began to mention that he had a daughter, as she knew. Vivian clarified, asking if he was referring to the young lady's mother, which the Duke confirmed, adding that she was a child he had to care for doubly as a father after she lost her mother at a young age. The Duke explained how precious and dear his daughter was, and that he wanted to give her only the most precious things in the world. But what she wanted was neither precious nor beautiful, always something small and ordinary. The Duke confessed that he forced upon her what he thought was best for her, believing it was love. His thoughts returned to when his daughter pleaded with him to save the man she loved, Leofrid, but he refused, sharply asking if she still held out hope, and explaining that there was no evidence to clear Leofrid's name, and that helping him would also make them traitors. He then coldly reminded her that as compensation for allowing Leofrid to die silently, she was promised the position of crown princess, so she had to forget him. He remembered his daughter looking at him in despair, realizing his foolishness, and he didn't even know she was carrying his grandchild in her womb. So, the child who had always been obedient to her father finally left him to protect that precious little life. The Duke admitted that at that moment he realized he wasn't living for his child, but for his own selfish desires. Years later, the child returned with Rahel, but she was terminally ill. Remorse filled his heart, thinking that if he had respected her wishes, if he hadn't made her run away, perhaps that terrible disease would never have afflicted her. He concluded by admitting that to this day, he still regrets. That day, Vivian, who had been listening quietly, understood everything. She thought to herself that the young lady's mother must have hated the Duke for forcing her to do things she didn't want to do. Vivian tried to comfort the Duke, explaining that parents are naturally like that. She related his story to her own experience with her father, who used to force her to take medicine even when she didn't want to, just so she wouldn't get sick. He also used to stop her from climbing trees, fearing she would get hurt, even though she really wanted to. Despite all that, she emphasized that she still loved her father very much, because she knew very well that everything he did was out of love for her. She then concluded that, based on this, the young lady's mother must have also loved the Duke very much, and because of that love, she would be sad if her beloved person continued to be a prisoner of the past. Vivian's words brought back the Duke's memories of his daughter Isabella's last moments, when she confessed to him that she had held a grudge against him in the past and had not yet fully forgiven him. But she added that after becoming a mother, she began to understand his feelings and pleaded with him, holding his hand. She realized that her father could not have done otherwise at that time, so she asked him to forgive her past self. After recalling this painful memory, the Duke whispered to himself that it was time to let that child go and let her rest in peace. Meanwhile, in another room in the palace, Sally was throwing a tantrum, smashing her things and shouting, wondering what her mother was doing. She had thought her mother would find a way to drive Vivian out, but she felt great resentment because the girl was spending more and more time in the palace. She decided to have some snacks, but found that no one responded to her. Her anger increased when she realized that even the servants were starting to ignore her. She complained to herself that in the past, they would come running whenever she called. As she was walking down the corridor, she suddenly stopped because she caught a glimpse of Vivian. Vivian was talking to Owen the butler, telling him that she had read a book with the Duke today, which shocked Sally, who wondered why she was coming out of the Duke's office. Sally couldn't believe what she was seeing, wondering to herself how that girl had managed to deceive the Duke and get close to him, and realized she could no longer leave this matter to her mother. She resolved that she had to drive the girl out herself before it was too late. Later, as Vivian was preparing to go home, she told Rahel that they should meet the day after tomorrow. Rahel was surprised by this and asked why they weren't meeting tomorrow. So Vivian told her that tomorrow was her mother's death anniversary and wondered if she didn't need to be in mourning. Rahel lowered her head sadly and replied that she doesn't do such things. Vivian felt anxious and asked her why and if she was on bad terms with her mother, but she quickly changed her tune, stressing that she wouldn't bring up the topic again because she didn't want to say anything that might hurt her. Rahel denied that was the case, so Vivian asked her for the real reason. Rahel explained that she felt her grandfather wouldn't want to see her mourning for her mother. Vivian was shocked by her words, and she grabbed Rahel, stressing to her that it wasn't true, because it's completely natural for a daughter to miss and remember her mother. Rahel's thoughts drifted back to the past, and she remembered hearing the Duke say that if it weren't for her existence, her mother wouldn't have suffered and become so ill. She also remembered seeing her grandfather collapse beside her mother, sadly whispering that Isella had become like this just to save her. At that moment, a terrible idea became deeply ingrained in little Rahel's mind. Her mother's illness was because of her. At the funeral, she became completely convinced that she was the reason for her mother's death. Rahel thought to herself that her grandfather must hate her, and she hated him too, but deep down she felt very sad because she didn't want to see him cry. So, she concluded that it was best not to attend the memorial service. Vivian broke her silence and sincerely asked her a direct question, which was whether she missed her mother. After some hesitation, Rahel admitted that she did miss her mother very much. Hearing this, Vivian grabbed her hand and proposed they go see her mother, which left Rahel confused. She wondered how, and Vivian explained that she had seen a portrait of her mother in the mansion and asked if she knew its location. Rahel replied that she thought the portrait was in the showroom on the 4th floor. Vivian smiled enthusiastically and suggested they sneak over today because the Duke would be busy with a memorial service tomorrow and wouldn't notice their absence. Rahel immediately agreed, expressing her desire to go. Vivian was happy with her agreement, but reminded her that they should bring flowers when visiting the deceased. Rahel suddenly remembered that her mother liked a specific type of flower. She explained that it was a flower called marca that only bloomed in the north, and she sadly realized they wouldn't have it here. But Vivian didn't give up and enthusiastically suggested they make it themselves. She asked Rahel to describe the flower's shape, and Rahel told her there should be drawings of the flowers in the library. Vivian was excited by the idea and told Rahel to go find the drawings while she would go make sure the showroom was empty. She said goodbye, hoping to see her again soon, and hurried off. As Vivian was on her way, Sally was watching them from a distance with a wicked look in her eyes, muttering to herself that this would be Vivian's end. Later, Vivian and Rahel sat together, having finished making the paper flowers. Vivian shouted happily, declaring the mission complete. She was very proud of the result, as the flowers were even prettier than she had expected, and she even wondered to herself if she was a genius at the art of paper folding. But the truth was, Rahel had done most of the work, folding 70 of the flowers herself. Vivian suggested they go to the showroom now, assuring Rahel that there was usually no one there, and that it would be safe. When they arrived, they confirmed that no one was around. Just as they were walking towards the portrait, Vivian suddenly stopped. She was surprised to find the nanny and Sally waiting for them. The nanny asked to speak with Vivian for a moment, and Vivian had a bad feeling about the situation. Vivian asked the nanny what she wanted, but Sally interrupted her, loudly accusing her of stealing something from the young lady. Rahel immediately intervened and defended Vivian, stressing that Vivian had been with her the whole time and hadn't done anything suspicious. But Sally didn't back down, falsely claiming that she saw Vivian leave the young lady's room, take a different route, and then sneak back into the room alone. Vivian strongly denied it, stressing that she never went back to the room and that the young lady was already back when she arrived. Sally cunningly asked if anyone else had seen her elsewhere at that time, certain that there were usually no servants on the 4th floor. Vivian gathered her courage and responded to Sally's accusation, saying she had no obligation to prove her innocence and that, on the contrary, Sally had to prove her guilt and sternly asked if she had any proof. Sally pointed at Vivian's bag and told her to open it. Vivian was confused because she had been busy putting the paper flowers in her bag and hadn't noticed what else might be inside. The bag contained the paper flowers she had made with Rahel, and if they were seen, she would have to explain the matter. This way, their plan to sneak into the showroom would be exposed. Just as Vivian was hesitating, Sally walked up to her and roughly snatched her bag, taunting that if she was so confident in herself, she should let her see what was inside. Vivian yelled in her face, scolding her for her actions, but Sally turned the bag upside down, causing all the paper flowers to scatter on the floor. Among the flowers, something else fell out, and it was Rahel's hairpin. Vivian was completely stunned and panicked, wondering how Rahel's hairpin had gotten into her bag. In that moment, she realized she had fallen into a trap that the nanny and her daughter had orchestrated to get her kicked out of the mansion. Confusion washed over her, and she wondered why they would go to such lengths. Sally picked up the hairpin and triumphantly shouted that she had indeed stolen something. She pointed at the scattered paper flowers, claiming Vivian had made them just to hide the stolen hairpin. Then she accused Vivian of being a very wicked child, which caught the attention of some servants who began to wonder what was happening. The nanny also joined in, loudly scolding Vivian, questioning how she dared to steal the young lady's hairpin and expressing great disappointment in her after the young lady had trusted her. The servants began to whisper among themselves, convinced that Vivian had indeed stolen the young lady's belongings. Vivian felt hopeless and tried to calm down and think of a way to prove her innocence. But she found no way out. She was the one who had suggested going to the showroom, and she was the one who had told Rahel to get the book from the library. Fear gripped her heart. She wondered if Rahel would still believe her after seeing the hairpin fall out of her bag, and worried that Rahel would think she had been deceiving her all along. Suddenly, the servant's chatter was interrupted by an authoritative voice that asked why there was such a commotion. It was the Duke, who had just arrived. The nanny bowed respectfully, and the Duke asked her why she was disciplining the child. The nanny claimed that Vivian had entered the young lady's room alone and stolen something, and that she was questioning her about it. The Duke calmly asked if she had any proof and whether she was pressuring the child based solely on suspicion. Sally immediately stepped forward, presented the hairpin to the Duke, and stressed that it was found in Vivian's bag. The Duke looked at Vivian and asked her directly if she had really stolen it. Vivian felt helpless because no matter how she thought about it, she couldn't find a way to prove her innocence, and all she could do was shout that it wasn't fair and that she hadn't done it. But before she could speak, Rahel interrupted her in a calm voice, announcing that she had given it to Vivian. Vivian was utterly shocked and couldn't believe that Rahel was defending her. Rahel continued coldly, her words directed at the nanny, sarcastically asking if she needed the nanny's permission to give her own things to a friend. The nanny tried to persuade Rahel that covering up a friend's mistake doesn't make one a good friend, and that a true friend is someone who points out mistakes. But Rahel cut her off firmly, explaining that a true friend is someone who believes in their friend and helps them when they are treated unfairly. She remembered the words Vivian had taught her. When a friend is treated unfairly, you must believe in and help them, not run away. Then Sally turned to the paper flowers scattered on the floor and angrily asked Vivian why she was carrying them. Rahel calmly replied that they had made the flowers together to offer to her mother. Vivian was surprised and grateful because Rahel was willing to reveal their secret plan to protect her. The Duke was surprised and asked her why she wanted to go today instead of on the Memorial Day tomorrow. Rahel answered hesitantly that it was because she thought her grandfather might not be happy to see her there. The Duke was stunned by her words. The butler, Owen, intervened, announcing that the false accusation against Vivian was now cleared and advised everyone to return to their posts. Owen then demanded that Sally apologize to Vivian for her false accusation. Sally looked at her mother, but the nanny turned her face away, so Sally hastily ran off. Vivian thought to herself that if they had any intention of apologizing, they wouldn't have set this trap in the first place. Rahel grabbed Vivian's hand and told her it was getting late and she had to go home. Vivian stopped her for a moment and knelt on the floor to gather the scattered paper flowers, which confused Rahel, who asked what she was doing. Vivian explained that she couldn't just leave them, that they had said they would offer them to her mother, and suggested they gather some decent ones to give to her mother. Rahel grabbed her hand and told her it was enough and that she had to go now. But Vivian refused, because she felt that Rahel's sincerity shouldn't be trampled on like this. So the Duke stepped in and asked Rahel if she would be willing to go to the back garden with him tomorrow. He then added that Vivian should come along too. The next day, the Duke, Vivian, and Rahel stood before Isabella's grave. Vivian had made a bouquet full of paper marca flowers and carefully placed it in front of the grave. The Duke realized that Rahel must have told Vivian about these flowers that Isabella liked, and he concluded that she must have always wanted to come to her mother's grave. The Duke felt a deep sense of regret and blamed himself for his foolishness for not realizing this until now. As he stood there, the two of them exchanged a glance, and Rahel turned her face away. Rahel remembered the Duke breaking down in grief and remembered his words that indirectly blamed Rahel for her mother's illness and death. As Rahel remembered her grandfather's crying, guilt filled her heart, and it was as if she could hear his cries again. But the Duke's calm voice interrupted her thoughts, assuring her that her mother would surely be happy to see her. The Duke told Rahel that if he had known she wanted to visit her mother's grave, he would have brought her sooner. He had always thought she was afraid of him, but he realized that was just an excuse. The Duke admitted that, in fact, he was the cowardly one who didn't have the courage to face her, because whenever he saw her, he would feel suffocated by the thought that he was the one who had killed her mother. He had spent his whole life regretting sending her mother away back then, but he added that he now understood his regret was too late, and if he let this moment pass, he would regret leaving her alone again. He then sincerely apologized to her. He admitted that he was a foolish grandfather and that he had realized it too late. Rahel was confused, not knowing what to say or how to feel. Were these the words she wanted to hear, or was she angry? She didn't know the answer. Just as Rahel was lost in thought, she ran off. Vivian explained to the Duke that perhaps the young lady didn't hate him, and compared the situation to her relationship with her father, or how they would be awkward for a while after a fight and then make up. She added that the young lady had been hurt for a long time, so it would take longer. Then she asked the Duke if he was willing to wait for her, and he replied that, of course, he would wait for her no matter how long it took. So Vivian declared that she would wait with him too. Then she turned to him and said that she would go check on the young lady first. Vivian bowed to the Duke and left, leaving him with a faint smile. The Duke stood before his daughter's grave and promised her that they would be all right. Later in the library, Vivian found Rahel crying on the floor. Vivian asked her if she had run away because she was shy or because she hated the Duke. Vivian assured her that she could help if she knew how she felt. Rahel remembered what Vivian had said before, that friends should share their true feelings. Rahel confessed that she wasn't sure about her own feelings either. She didn't know if she was happy or sad, nor did she understand what she wanted from her grandfather. She worried if Vivian could understand her unstable state. Vivian smiled and assured her that of course she understood, and that she would stay by her side until she figured out her own heart. She promised that she would comfort Rahel when she cried, laugh with her when she laughed, and get angry with her when she was angry, because she would always be on Rahel's side. This deeply touched Rahel, and she softly called Vivian's name. Rahel shyly admitted to herself that she liked Vivian very much. 2 months after the anniversary of Rahel's mother's death, many things had changed in their relationship. Rahel took her to the secret magic training ground in the palace basement, where she showed her the magical abilities she had been hiding. Not only that, but she also told Vivian about her unique constitution, that she absorbs the magical energy of her surroundings. Although Vivian already knew all this from reading the original novel, she still felt immense happiness because it meant Rahel was starting to trust her more. But she also noticed a slight, strange change in Rahel's behavior. Once, Rahel seriously asked her if she really hated boys. Vivian replied that she did hate boys and would only play with Rahel. Vivian thought Rahel was worried that she would get married and leave her in the future, so she firmly reassured Rahel, emphasizing that she wouldn't play with boys and would never hold their hands. Rahel seemed a little confused by this promise, but didn't press further, so Vivian assumed she was relieved. The biggest change since that day was that the Duke began inviting them for tea together. Vivian noticed that Rahel's relationship with her grandfather was gradually improving. Rahel became calmer, no longer avoided the Duke, and seemed to have let her guard down around him. Most importantly, she was now starting to have someone to rely on like a real child, which made Vivian very relieved. Suddenly, Vivian heard a strange buzzing sound. She wondered where the sound was coming from and realized it was from the direction of the western forest. She remembered that adults were forbidden from entering that forest because magical beasts often appeared there, but she felt as if something was calling to her from there. Rahel noticed she was distracted and asked if something was wrong, which Vivian quickly denied. She reassured herself that it was just her imagination, as it was impossible to hear a sound from the forest while inside the palace. Just then, the Duke summoned them. He told them that the rain looked a bit bad, and that it would be best for Vivian to wait for it to stop before leaving. While sitting, Vivian noticed Rahel was holding her hand, and the Duke was staring at them. Vivian felt a bit flustered and quickly pulled her hand away, wondering if it was too impolite to hold hands in front of the Duke. To her surprise, the Duke kept staring at them, even after she let go. The Duke commented that it rained often in the south, so Vivian asked if it rarely rained in the north, even in the summer. The Duke explained that it didn't rain this heavily in the north, that the situation was completely different, which he found interesting, although the villagers didn't particularly welcome summer. Vivian told him she also liked rainy days because the sound of the rain helped her sleep well, but she added worriedly that it had better not rain during the festival. The Duke was surprised by the word festival, so Vivian explained to him that it was the summer festival held every year in 2 weeks. She added excitedly that people would wear demon and ghost costumes, and there would be lots of delicious food for sale, which is why she liked the festival. The Duke showed interest in the ghost costumes, so Vivian seized the opportunity and politely asked if she could take Rahel out on the day of the festival. The Duke looked at Rahel and asked if she wanted to go too, and Vivian assured him on her behalf that she did. But the Duke expressed his doubt and sternly asked her if Rahel had only reluctantly agreed because of her pestering. Vivian felt flustered, wondering how the Duke knew. But Rahel intervened and denied it, stressing that she wanted to go herself. The Duke smiled and granted their request, and Vivian cheered happily, declaring him the best Duke in the world. Then, the Duke turned to speak with Vivian, asking about her father's bakery and proposing to hire him as an assistant to the chef, as the chef needed help. Vivian was surprised by the offer, wondering if he really intended to make her father chef's assistant. The Duke confirmed it, provided her father agreed, of course. Vivian realized this offer meant the Duke valued her highly, as the Delphin family could hire any number of assistants, and if her father became a servant in the ducal household, they wouldn't have to travel back and forth between their home and the palace. Most importantly, the salary of a ducal servant would be much higher than the bakery's income. It was a huge opportunity, but after a moment of thought, she thanked the Duke for his kindness, but had to refuse. The Duke was surprised by her refusal and asked for the reason. Vivian hesitantly admitted that her father had no talent for baking or cooking. She thought to herself that no matter how greedy she was, she had a conscience. The Duke tried to smooth things over, thinking she might just be being modest as a daughter who loved her father. She'd be proud of him in front of others. The Duke chuckled, admitting he had expected her to refuse, but the reason was unexpected. In fact, it made him want to try her father's bread even more. Vivian thought that if he saw her father's bread with his own eyes, he wouldn't be saying that. Then the Duke asked if her father was good at anything else, which left her stumped. That night, Vivian was stunned by the sight before her. Her father was holding a plate of bizarrely shaped blue bread and offering it to her. She asked in horror what it was, and he proudly told her it was a new menu item for the bakery that he had spent days developing. Vivian wondered what ingredients he used to make the bread blue, and her father explained it was made with herbs. But he added some food coloring because he thought plain bread was too boring and encouraged her to try it. Vivian thought to herself that blue was the worst color in the world because it completely killed one's appetite. She hesitantly took a bite of the bread, thinking it was made of herbs. Her father asked for her opinion, and she replied that if this thing wasn't healthy, its taste would simply make her angry. Vivian realized things couldn't go on like this. Their bakery wouldn't survive, and her father was getting by purely on his handsome looks. She felt a little guilty for being too harsh on him, so she offered to eat at least one. Then an idea struck her, and she suggested he go work at the Delphin estate, telling him that the Duke wanted to hire him as a servant. Vivian's father was surprised to hear the Duke's name, so his daughter asked what he thought of the offer, but he coldly and flatly refused, declaring he would never go to the Delphin palace. Vivian was shocked by his reaction and tried to convince him it was a chance to earn more money and live in a grand palace. But her father stood his ground, explaining that he didn't want to belong to someone else, as it was a boring and terrifying job. He added that he preferred a life with just the two of them and hurriedly hugged her. Vivian assured him that she also liked living with him and had only asked because he seemed to be working very hard lately. Her father smiled gently, commenting that his daughter had grown up and was starting to worry about him. Then he remembered she hadn't had dinner yet and told her he had prepared soup. He gleefully explained that he had used the leftover herbs from the bread. Vivian thought in horror that he had put herbs in the meal as well. Sure enough, as her father carried her to the dining table, he told her she had to try his soup, and Vivian felt she was doomed. While eating, her father asked what she had learned at the palace today. She replied that she had a history lesson, while thinking to herself that she was starting to get used to this strange taste. He asked if she remembered what she had learned in class today. She tried hard to recall what she had learned, and then suddenly said the name Dean Luzoid. Suddenly, her father started coughing violently, and Vivian, terrified, anxiously asked if he was okay. She rushed to get him a glass of water. After he calmed down, he thanked her, and she asked if he knew the person too. He answered in confusion that he did, as he was a famous person after all. Vivian thought that since her father was from the Empire, it was normal for him to know of him, and added that the man was a very famous and amazing person. She then began to explain to him what she had learned in her history class. In this world, there is a race different from humans, known as the Demon Tribe, and they were all proficient in magic. Because they used this power to attack and plunder humans, the conflict between humans and the Demon Tribe never ceased. But 10 years ago, the current emperor decided to conquer the demon world. The leader of that campaign was the youngest sword master in the Empire's history, the captain of the Empire's Second Night Order, Dean Luzoid. Despite fighting in difficult terrain, he achieved a string of victories. But in the end, after being ambushed and surrounded by the Demon Tribe, he ordered his subordinates to fully retreat while he stayed behind alone to fight them, and it is said he died in battle. Since his body was never found, he was officially listed as missing. After that, the invasions and plundering by the Demon Tribe subsided for a while. Therefore, the people of the Empire bestowed upon him the title of hero and commemorated him. Her father asked her what she thought of this person. She replied that she was just a 9-year-old child, and it was natural to admire a hero because he was amazing. He was strong enough to defeat villains on his own and brave enough to save his subordinates even if it meant death. Her father calmly interrupted her, saying that the person might not have been so amazing in reality. Vivian was surprised by her father's words, so he explained to her that history is written by the victors, so it always favors their side. He presented her with another possibility. Perhaps the Demon Tribe was actually kind, and Dean Luzoid was the evil one, and people lied about him because he was human, so people took his side. He added that just as there are bad people, there are also good demons, and he didn't want her to hate good demons just because history was written from a human perspective. Vivian asked in surprise if he had ever met a good demon. Her father gave an affirmative answer, explaining that he had met one before the demon world was sealed. Vivian thought to herself that the demon world was sealed 6 years ago, that the Demon King had closed the passage after losing the war, and she wondered if her father had really met a demon before then. Her father admitted that in the past, he too had believed the history he was taught and thought Dean Luzoid was evil, but he regretted it and said he hoped his daughter wouldn't make the same mistake. Vivian wondered to herself if he was talking about that good demon, but she assured him that she would judge for herself whether a person was good or bad. Her father smiled and jokingly asked whose smart and kind daughter she was, and she replied that she was her mother's daughter, which made them laugh. Later, as Vivian was getting ready for bed, her father called out to her, but she was standing by the window, staring outside, so he anxiously asked if something was wrong. Vivian quickly denied it, but her father noticed she was hiding some kind of worry, as she tended to hide things if she thought they would make him worry. Suddenly, Vivian turned and called out to him, and he walked over and took her in his arms. He asked her again what had happened, emphasizing that there was no reason to hide it if it wasn't a big deal. Vivian hesitated for a moment, then confessed that she felt as if the forest was calling to her. Her father clarified if she was referring to the Western Forest, which she denied, saying that she didn't hear a specific person's voice, but rather it felt more like the forest itself was calling to her. She stressed to him that it was a strange feeling, but he asked her seriously if she felt this way because he had forbidden her from going there. Vivian vehemently denied this, reminding him that he had told her there were scary monsters there. In response, her father sternly warned her to never go to that forest. After tucking her into bed, he wished her sweet dreams. He wondered anxiously if something was happening in the forest. Notably, the Emperor's men were searching for places where the border between the human world and the demon world was weak. Their goal was not to protect the people, as Vivian had learned in her history books, but to travel to the demon world and obtain the heart of the Demon King. Unlike humans, every individual of the demon race was powerful and capable of using magic, and legend had it that their king's heart was a massive core of condensed magical power. The Emperor, obsessed with power due to his inferiority complex towards Leafred, coveted the Demon King's heart. Vivian's father had thought the Emperor had given up when the gate to the demon world closed, but he suspected the Emperor might still be obsessed. He then looked at the calendar and realized the summer festival was approaching, which his daughter must be eagerly anticipating. He recalled that the last time he went to the forest was in March. Vivian's father remembered that he had visited the forest just a few days before Duke Delphin's arrival. He thought to himself that it was time to go and check the situation in person. Meanwhile, the nanny Margaret stood before her room door, trembling in fear. She had received a threatening letter stating that anyone hiding the traitor's daughter would be sentenced to death. Margaret realized that someone knew Rahel was a boy, and that it was Sally who had leaked the secret, because the letter threatened that if she didn't come to the inn, the Duke would find out that her daughter had exposed the young lady's secret. Margaret recalled that Sally's previous behavior had been suspicious. Her mind went back to a short while ago, when Sally had angrily asked her when she was going to get rid of that girl. Margaret had replied that she was waiting for the right time, but Sally had yelled in her face that at this rate, Vivian might end up marrying Rahel. Margaret, furious, had scolded her daughter for speaking so recklessly. Sally apologized, saying she had spoken out of turn because she was angry. Margaret had sternly warned her that the day someone else heard about this would be the day they died. Margaret suspected that Sally had leaked the secret. Just then, a maid handed her a letter delivered by a strange man. Margaret realized that since Sally was also implicated, she had to meet this man immediately. She went to the location specified in the letter and entered a dark room where she found a mysterious man waiting for her. The man asked her how her life in the countryside had been for the past few months. Margaret immediately realized that this man was the Imperial inspector who had visited the palace months ago. Fear enveloped her as she understood that the Emperor already knew Rahel's secret. She fell to her knees, begging him for mercy, claiming she would never dare to deceive His Majesty the Emperor, and explaining that she was only trying to raise her daughter well after she lost her father at a young age. But the inspector cut her off coldly, stressing that he had not summoned her to listen to her sentimental pleas, and told her that His Majesty wished to handle the matter quietly, and that she must resolve it discreetly herself. The required script was, the young lady, who had gone to the countryside to recuperate with her grandfather, dies in a tragic accident. The inspector concluded with a question. He asked her with a cunning smile what a traitor who had hidden the son of a traitor must do to survive in such a situation. Meanwhile, in the village, Vivian stood before the closed bakery. She thought to herself that as a mature 9-year-old, she understood the hardships of parenting and that her father might occasionally want a break from his parental duties to go out with his friends. But she wondered angrily why he had to choose this particular time, just days before the festival, and when their new bread was so popular. The thought of her father going to see a friend at such a crucial time, when he should be making a lot of money, made Vivian very angry. But her father explained to her that this time was different. He reminded her about his friend, Uncle Max, and told her that the cousin of Max's father had passed away, so he felt he had to go. Vivian figured this meant he was going to the funeral of someone who was practically a stranger. Despite her dissatisfaction, her father assured her that he would be back on the last day of the festival. Her father instructed her not to complain, to remember to wash her hands after playing, and not to forget to brush her teeth before bed. Vivian teased him, telling him not to drink too much, not to wander around, and not to go near scary men. Her father, amused by her audacity, thought to himself who was the father and who was the daughter here. But he assured her he would behave and return safely, and asked her to get along with the young lady while he was away. He then turned to the butler, Owen, apologized for the trouble, and asked him to take good care of Vivian. Vivian decided to stay at Rahel's house while her father was away. She had originally planned to stay at the grocery store, but Rahel had asked her if she was going to stay there, and if that boy named Peter would be there too. Vivian replied that it should be so, since the store was Peter's home. But Rahel flatly rejected the idea. Rahel explained that she had been told that girls and boys shouldn't sleep together after the age of 8. Vivian tried to reassure her, saying they wouldn't be sleeping together as they would each have separate rooms. But Rahel stubbornly refused. In that moment, Vivian realized that Rahel was jealous of her potential closeness to Peter. Vivian assured her that she was still her favorite person. Rahel denied this and suggested she stay at the palace instead, explaining that there were many guest rooms, which Vivian had not realized. Vivian thought it was the perfect environment to leave a child, as no carriage was needed, the place was safe, and there were friends there, so she readily agreed to the idea. And so, according to Rahel's wishes, Vivian came to stay at the Ducal residence. Upon arriving, Vivian excitedly told her that they could stay up all night playing and even have a pillow fight. Vivian was thrilled, as it was her first time having a sleepover at a friend's house. That night, as they were playing chess, Vivian yawned from sleepiness. Rahel suddenly stood up and announced that she was going back to her own room now, surprising Vivian, who thought, doesn't she sleep here? Rahel explained that this was Vivian's room, so the latter reminded her that it was customary for friends to sleep together during a sleepover. But Rahel replied that sleeping together before marriage was against etiquette. Vivian tried to argue with her that this only applied to boys and girls, and since they were two girls, it was fine. But Rahel insisted and fled from the room. leaving Vivian utterly confused. Vivian grumbled, wondering if they really couldn't sleep together for several days, and sadly thought that this might be their first and last night together, as it would be impossible for her father to let her stay out overnight once he returned. But Rahel held her ground, waved good night to her, and then closed the door. Vivian was shocked by her actions, angrily wondering why she had invited her to stay at the palace in the first place. She threw herself onto the bed, calling Rahel a fool, but she soon succumbed to the softness and comfort of the bed. She thought that if she closed her eyes, she would fall asleep instantly. But at that very moment, she heard that mysterious voice calling her again.